Let's start this off then, eh?
Sure thing.
Great stuff. All right. Next slide on the agenda.
I'll be able to tell you, but I did send you a new slide. I think we should start with this one.
Yeah, no problem. I can do that. I've got it ready.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, welcome back to the
Installment.
Novocastrian Presents, Part 3. Matt Presti, Caleb Lamont. Let's do it, lads.
I just finished that
Here we go.
Searle, is that right? Podcast. I just finished that last night. That was a great episode on your tech podcast.
Oh,
can't wait to
Jason
watch that.
Verbelli?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, he's an OG of the busting scientism league of gentlemen, of extraordinary gentlemen. He'd be great to have on your guys' deal if you ever want to really get more into some of the alternative theories out there. But he does have a heavy Russell influence, but not strictly. So he has done quite a lot of debunking of mainstream physics. Also talks a lot about Ed Dowd's work and others, but again, he tears these guys up on Twitter. They can't stand him. Any mainstream physics account, he'll always anything to do with black holes, non-existent black holes, and all this garbage. You'll see front and center a nice reply by him saying they have no existence. Where's your evidence? Why haven't you looked into this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy? So it's just great. He trolls them harder than anybody I know.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get to that podcast. I've just been watching knowing the creator series that you made.
Yeah, that's a good one too. That's more on the philosophy of Walter Russell and how to tap your inner creative genius, if you will, and maximize output.
I found your explanations of meditation very helpful. Obviously, those were shared by Russell. And especially at this time, it's a strange time for me. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening around me, and I've been able to cope better, actually. And this research has come in just at the right time. So it's interesting, those synchronicities.
Yeah, for sure.
So this image here, this swirly line, it reminds me of something from Dragon Ball Z. Whenever Goku gets killed, he goes to the afterlife, and the afterlife is like this concrete bridge hovering above golden clouds, stretching on for infinity. And this concrete bridge is shaped like this thing here, but it's like a dragon. So it goes on and on and on. So he has to like run down this bridge for thousands of miles. But I want to focus up here to the top left of the corner of the image here, because you have these elements. Well, essentially, this is the Walter Russell periodic table of elements.
That's correct. 9 octaves.
Octaves. And up here, you see in the box 21 elements, which come before hydrogen. But then when you go down here to the other section, there's still 3 extra elements leading up to hydrogen, so making up 24 in all. So there's 24 elements lighter than hydrogen, if I'm getting that correct.
Yeah, that's correct. That precede hydrogen.
24 elements that precede hydrogen. So
this is a very interesting idea.
Right. Now, I'm interested in Wilhelm Reich's theories of the orgone. I'm interested in Baron Karl Reichenbach's observations of the ode, or the odic force, and thinking about if those are the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. Wilhelm Reich says that orgone is the concrete physical mover of planets, because he observed a cosmic orgone stream. Two streams, actually. He observed an equatorial stream and a galactic stream that he made through observations of the atmosphere. He built different devices that demonstrated the orgone accumulator, a motor, and a sort of orgone light bulb kind of thing, and a cloud buster. And these devices are sort of his hard evidence, to show this. But he also says orgone is mass free, meaning it has no mass. So how can something that has no mass be the quote unquote concrete physical mover of planets? And Baron Reichenbach, when he's talking about the odic force, he says that it is a very material phenomenon. So somehow I have to reconcile the idea that this stuff is at the same time physical, concrete, physical material, but at the same time having no mass. And when you showed me originally this periodic table of elements, and I saw that there were actual elements lighter than hydrogen that account, my immediate thought was, well, that can account for the ether, so to speak. So the ether concept, of times past was refining and refining, but it was like slow evolution, like Stone Age conceptualization. It continued to get refined up until the time of Einstein, and then Einstein actually de-evolved the concept of the ether, whereas Wilhelm Reich took the cosmic leap in evolution of the concept of the ether into the concept of the orgone. But if we look at this table, it's interesting that the ether is elements. So there is no difference between an element and the ether. The ether is made of elements, 24 elements, in fact.
Who says that? Is that Reich's assertion?
Oh no, I'm just kind of making the connection here. If
Okay. With the
I,
21.
I'm speaking as if I know. I'm actually, wondering, but I'm just saying it that way. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
I was going back to what you were saying about ode having no mass and yet it being material substance. And I immediately thought, well, no detectable mass that we can use with the devices that we have now. Right?
No, there aren't generally. I mean, there are a couple. For instance, in the preceding of hydrogen, you have tritium and deuterium, which again, what science calls these elements of the first octave are isotopes. In other words, split, like black keys on a piano, for instance, would be considered isotopes, whereas a fully toned element would be a white key. It wouldn't be split between a tone. So that's what Russell says, is that all these 21 elements prior to hydrogen are not split tone isotopes of hydrogen, but rather fully toned elements. And again, you have to equate the breathing cycle, that all things breathe. And so what is our medium that surrounds us? When we inhale and exhale, we're inhaling what? We're inhaling a mixture of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and so on that makes up our atmosphere, right? Well, there's also an atmosphere in space, which are these, there you go, thanks for pulling that up, which are these 21 elements that have, these are the medium that the planets breathe in and exhale. And again, I can draw parallels to certain people that think that a spheroid in space can't maintain its atmosphere because if space is a vacuum, it would just explode. But these are the gases that surround, just like they surround our own body here on the planet. All bodies are surrounded by a medium. And what's interesting is the difference between the space gases, which are much like the air, the gases of the air that surround our bodies. It's the coolness of the air itself that keeps, you could say, things from exploding, because all matter wants to explode. It seeks to explode. It seeks to return to rest. And that's, simple experiment is hold a ball under the water and let it go. It immediately rushes to a place that it can rest. And so when
wasn't the analogy that you used like two barrels of rifles, muzzle to muzzle?
Yeah, yep, that's one too. So basically what you have is, cold, the absolute cold of space freezes matter. And so it's wound up through the twin opposing vortices, which we went over pretty extensively in the last episode. But what can't wind up through those opposing vortices is ejected at the equator. So it's an inhalation and an exhalation process that all bodies take place or take part in. And these are what you could say is the hypothetical ether, only it's got a greater explanative, demonstrative explanation. And ether was theorized to be particles that couldn't move, that had to be either liquid or some kind of medium that could be see-through so that it would transfer the motions of light. Again, if you look at the Russell science and especially the mirror cube demonstrates this, that all lights are reflected into neighboring wave fields. You don't need the idea of light traveling. The way that we measured light traveling was what the speed was clocked at from, I believe it was a radioactive element that we used to measure. I'd have to look over that. Don't quote me on that for sure, but if I remember correctly, that's the rays of radon or plutonium perhaps or uranium are extremely high because it's a element whose center is unwinding so rapidly that it throws off many so-called electrons, which are actually rings. But that's the ejection rate of those rings, 186,000 miles per second. So that's where they, slower rings back in earlier octaves have a slower ejection rate. So they would not move at that speed. But that's the maximum speed at which matter wants to unwind itself back to a state of rest, as opposed to this idea of going higher and higher into higher and higher vibrations, which is just simply false. It's what it's seeking to do is return to rest more rapidly. And we see that with old age in all things. All things die in a temporal universe. And that's why Russell would say we live in two universes, the universe of mind, which is the zero universe, which are where these inert gases are located on this spiral graph here. You see the zeros are at close to center of every octave. They center every octave literally, but they're not exactly center of the still white magnetic light, but they're the closest element that you get to that. And so the light is projected through these inert gases to produce the tonal octave color spectrum that is also mathematically equatable as well. So that the universe of mind is as cause projects its dual polarized effects of matter and motion onto the screen of space. So this literally is showing you how matter emerges from zero, from space, and returns to it in its journey of 9 octaves. You could say each one of these octaves is like a decade for a human being. So by the time we reach the ninth octave, 90 some plus years old, we're starting to unwind. We literally become more unwound as a body until we reach the end, which is yet again the beginning. So it's just it's a seamless cosmology, and something that these scientists have searched for, yet all miraculously have overlooked Walter Russell's work for whatever reason. So it's interesting, but nonetheless, it's a beautiful cosmology, and it's the only one that I've ever encountered that not only explains the universe mathematically, tonally, by color and color spectrum, what mind is, what the science of mind is, as well as the science of matter together. So in that sense, that regard, it is really standalone. And you can see how the red and blue make the pairs that create eventually the spherical forms. So 4 pairs of rings wind up, are expressed in each octave. You have the silicone, of course, carbon is the octave that we find ourselves in, and it's centered by the inert gas helium, which is why helium is the most plentiful gas, inert gas in the realm, in the zone of the Earth. And this is like the perfect place for our kind of life forms to exist. And it's interesting that we're moving now from carbon more toward the silicone. And we have discovered silicone chips in computers. So it's sort of a little proof of assertion that, we're maybe at the very beginning of moving into the silicone octave.
And then cobalt, and cobalt is in vitamin B12.
Right. Yep. And eventually, even the planets, you could say Mercury is in the second octave, Venus is in the third octave, and so on. Earth is in the carbon octave, Mars is in the silicon octave, and down into obviously the radioactive 8th and 9th octaves. You have Uranus and Pluto, Neptune, and such.
Is one of them the asteroid belt, or are we skipping the asteroid belt?
Well, that's interesting. Walter was asked by his gardener, Charles Hardy, who was the official biographer of the University of Science and Philosophy. He wrote the book A Worthy Messenger. He was the gardener for the Russells for 5 years at Swannanoa, and he caught the doctor on the porch one day, sitting in his wheelchair. He was up in age, probably in his early 90s, as he passed, refolded at 92 in 1963. So it would have been around close to that time. But he said, Dr. Russell, what is that asteroid belt? What caused that? And the doc sat for a second in quietude, and he looked at him and he said, it was not what did he say? It was not formed from natural causes. In other words, he was asserting that it was a civilization that blew its planet to smithereens, probably in a nuclear war. So they pushed the atmosphere of containment out until it breached, and that caused what you'd see in like a blown tire, for instance, except in the medium of space. That's what would produce that kind of a thing, is a planet exploding, which is not a natural cause. Typically, planets in Russell's science will move out beyond their octave range, and they no longer retain an orbit, and so they become comets, and they plunge back into the sun. So it's sort of a closed system, you could say, that the sun borns the planets journey away from home, they have children of their own called moons. They start to throw off rings, and the rings wind up into moons. And so the further the planets are, the older they are, and the more grandchildren they born, which are the grandchildren of the sun, you could say. And all planets, being doubly charged, are basically self-impregnated, and they born moons out through rings that the Earth has already thrown one ring off, and that wound up to become the moon. It's an interesting observation or theoretical science, you could say, but
That's
it's again,
incredible.
it's seamless. And then once these moons in the orbits of the planets leave the orbit, they also become comets. And so the comets can even travel between solar systems, between systems, and some end up plunging into the sun and serve to reimpregnate the sun, interestingly enough. But so it's a seamless, again, cosmology
So,
of birth, life,
so,
and death,
right.
which is what we see in all beings and bodies everywhere. So he simply applies that process to the solar system and all systems as well.
So Commons Beaumont would agree then that volcanoes and comets, there's a father-mother relationship going on there with the meteorites that are attracted to Earth, fall on Earth. But what originally causes that, the mother-father relationship of the solar system, which is absent from most mainstream theories, the fact that the sun attracts or the sun brings in comets, and the comets then do something which adds an extra level of chaos. It affects the weather, it affects the sea levels, it affects what bacteria is coming in, what toxic gases there are. It can shift the tide in the ways of populations. It can nature just decides it's going to cull off the population, and that's all from the suns. And even though the sun has a very masculine aspect to it, the way it brings life to planets, it also has a very feminine aspect in the way that it attracts these comets, almost as if like the sperm attracts the egg, and the Earth catches strays in the form of meteorites. As I said, makes the weather patterns unpredictable. It would not happen if the comets were not attracted by the sun, and it explains even natural phenomena, including earthquakes, which are caused by magnetic disturbances in the Earth crust. Japan has a lot of earthquakes, and that's because Japanese land is iron rich, and there's something going on in the sky which is causing these magnetic anomalies to happen when these earthquakes take off. And yes, Commons Beaumont believe that planets become comets once their life cycle's over. And even the astrophysicist Jeffrey Walensky has a very comprehensive theory on how that the Earth used to be a sun. It began as a sun. The sun becomes old or more mature. It turns into a planet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's how many people actually address that. It's great to know that Commons Beaumont, thought of that in that way. What these great minds could have, discussed together had they had the opportunity to sit down, and converse amongst themselves. There are a couple passages in The Secret of Light where he talks about the sun in particular. And this is one of the reasons too that when I read this book as the first book I had encountered, it was so incredible. Just let's take one sentence for instance, and I'll just read this quickly. But he says, "The ascent of man from the dark to the light is the forever repetitive play of man on the planets of suns." Now, one could just sit and comprehend that statement for hours, but it's just absolutely beautiful. It's poetic. It's like a poetic explanation of the universe. It doesn't read so scientific as you would think, but it reads right to the heart and right to the soul. The universal mind centers every particle and mass in this universe, animal, vegetable, or mineral, electron, atom, or sun. And upon looking at them, he's talking about matter being frozen. That is iron, man says, but it would not be in the form of iron as we know it. He's talking about what iron would look like on the sun. It would be the formless idea of iron as the sun knows it. In the incandescent sun is all idea that earth knows. The idea of the apple of earth is in the sun. Likewise, the wood of the tree and the violet in the meadow. Likewise, the cool earth is there with its rivers and mountains. All idea is one idea in the light of the sun. The light of the sun is never divided into its many seeming separate ideas until it is electrically extended from the sun, and those extensions electrically echoed back to it. The sun is a crucible which melts all ideas into one, then sets them out into space to cool and separate into many units of that one. Likewise, idea of mind never becomes the many ideas of creation until electricity divides that one idea into many separate parts. The one light cannot be divided, but extensions of the one light can appear to divide it. The spots of sunlight upon the cathedral floor are many, but they are all extensions of the one light of their source in the sun. Likewise, all mankind is an extension of the one idea of man, for man is but one in the light of his source. Likewise, all moving extensions of the one still light, as manifested in the white light of suns and the black light of their surrounding space, are but extensions of one source. It's absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
And it's basically, he goes on to say, all idea is still. And this, he's saying there is no separateness. And so when you understand that, there's a good episode as well on Unslaved. Michael interviewed a gentleman, I think it was somewhere the 30s, number 30 to 39, somewhere in there, or early 40s. He interviewed a gentleman who spoke about the sun. And it was a fantastic episode. And there were cross-pollinations between what he had discovered in his work and what Russell says in The Secret of Light. But yeah, it's the sun is basically, according to Russell, carbon, and carbon set alight, if you will. And of course, hydrogen would be one of the gases that are released from that burning. But it would also, just very interesting, where the sun is in the wave itself. Now, some suns are small, so they're younger. Others are older and larger. So you could literally take the spiral wave graph of the elements and plot where a star is on that graph as well. All of us are on that graph somewhere, all bodies in motion, even granite, even elements, you could say, show their age, because everything begins as, from tomion and moves into each octave. So what you're looking at, again, is why I like to say, and it was Darren Colomb who said this, but basically there's one element in creation, and that's carbon. And this chart is an age chart. It's either young carbon growing up to become carbon in the 4th and a half octave, or it's carbon aging past maturity into an older state where it eventually dies and goes back to repeat the process. So basically that all of nature is repetitive. He said repetition is also a term that is equivalent to the term reincarnation, that all things are repetitive, especially as nature shows us they are. It's interesting, the early church used to teach reincarnation, but they removed certain books that discussed it. I don't know why that was, but perhaps they don't want you to know that you have more than one life. Maybe the fear of death is something that they've capitalized on, and we can certainly, show many exhibits for that being the case, proof and etc.
Well, that would keep you in a very high vibration, wouldn't it?
Say again?
Not knowing that you had a life beyond this one would put you in a very high vibration, because, oh shit, I've only got one life. I need to do as much as I can. and he'd be keeping busy all the time. And he'd do as much as possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that two ways. Somebody that might know of their universality, for instance, and exhibits genius might not be a couch sitter. You know, they're going to be active and doing things 10 times what one man can do ordinarily. But again, it's, you know, like a Mozart or a Pico della Mirandola. They tend to burn out quickly, you know, sometimes. But as the case for each of them was, they both passed in their 30s.
There's one other idea I want to mix into what we're looking at here with the elemental chart. I've studied Joel Wallach, and his older stuff was heavily focused on education. He's still out there making new content, and it's still educative, but it's more geared now towards selling his product line, which is nutrition. But with the books I've read by him and his older material, his thing is that he's learned how to cure every disease with nutrition, because he started off as a veterinarian, and if a cow has arthritis in the hips, they don't take it to a specialist to have, you know, all of these fancy treatments for the rest of its life, like we do with grandma, you know.
Right.
We don't spend all that money on an animal, so they either figure out how to fix it quick and cheap, or they kill the animal in the farming industry. So he was active in curing all of these diseases in animals, and then when he went over into the medical world of human medical system, he saw that they were, instead of curing people, they were obviously sending them in for treatments every month and for the rest of their life with health insurance. So he said, well, why don't we just cure the diseases in humans the same way we did with animals? And essentially what it boils down to with him is that he calls it the 90 essential nutrients. There's 60 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids, 3 fatty acids. I'm just going off of memory here, so may want to double check that, but those are the 90 essential nutrients, and the 60 minerals that he talks about are on the periodic table of elements, and it runs all the way up to gold. Now that's talking, it may be different if we're looking at this one, but the standard periodic table of elements, your body uses every element all the way up to gold as a nutrient. Anything past gold is not really considered biological, I suppose. But now hold that thought, because I want to talk about Wilhelm Reich and what he discovered with the cancer biopathy and everything. He discovered that many diseases are caused by a low orgone charge, and he could heal people by putting them inside of a orgone accumulator. So when they sat in there, their body would recharge with orgone, and the symptoms would disappear, and wounds would heal faster, etc. So the view of Joel Wallach, where he says every disease is a nutritional deficiency disease, and then Wilhelm Reich's point of view, saying that, you know, a lot of diseases are caused by a low orgone charge, they seem to be separate. But this chart we're looking at here, it actually unites the two, because if it is accurate to say that orgone does consist of these 24 elements that come before hydrogen, then you literally are looking at a nutritional deficiency, because a low orgone charge would be the same thing as saying you're deficient in these elements. See what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So the treatment, again, these three octaves, the 21 elements, are what science currently calls the occluded gases. So if you know what an occluded gas is, basically when you burn wood or burn carbon, the smoke given off, the reason it rises up into space is because that's exactly where it's going. The space is filled. In fact, there's no space that isn't filled with these three octaves of gas, which is why the flat earth community has a lesson to learn, that it's not a vacuum. There's fully toned elements populating all of space, and the evidence for that is that smoke rises. If we were in a dome, where's all the smoke go? We'd have been
Nate,
choked out after the first volcano went off. All of us,
yeah,
we'd be
what he's
dead
saying
after the first
there's
massive volcanic eruption.
okay.
Yeah. So the space gases are the explanation, because Russell said you could take a bar of iron and stick it in a hermetically sealed box and melt it, and the occluded gases would fill the box, and it would no longer be iron, because these occluded gases are no longer part of that molten form. But the minute you let it harden back up, the occluded gases would go back into the iron, and it would be iron again. So in the way that you're saying, yeah, the orgone charging system, he could have been creating these occluded gases. Now, that could be something that, obviously it charges the planet when it breathes in through the poles, of which there are two. As you can see through Starlapse photography, it does show you two poles of rotation, which the only thing I know that happens on would be obviously a planetoid. But those poles are the nostrils that breathe in the gases of space, and that charges the planet, which gives it the life that we experience. And it also creates all of the other elements. Again, there'd be no, without that breathing cycle, which all things do breathe, as well as your field is created by the in-breath. It's interesting with this chart, though, is he shows that it's coming in through the south and exiting out of the north, which I actually don't know that he meant to do that. This was nature's sex principle, but this chart was to show what a over unity generator would do, interestingly enough. But yeah, the orgone literally could be this idea of the space gases, or this ether idea. Again, the ether idea is it's a medium that had to be fixed, whereas Walter says that the space gases and the planets and the whole universe all move together. So that's an interesting idea to consider.
This is the one illustration in the entire collection that's actually inconsistent in the direction of flow, like you were just saying.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's correct. And I think because he meant, in The Wave Lies the Secret of Creation book, which Dr. Binder wrote, former president of the university back in the 80s and 90s, this was meant to connote a over unity device. And basically you do see a field created, but yeah, it's in the content underneath the words, it says the uncreated universe is light undivided. The created universe is light divided into mated pairs, which is why we get male and female. and why they say God is sexless or the undivided. And we've heard the term God thrown around, obviously, a lot, but when you read the Russell Science, you quickly grok that he redefines God, basically. They do use the term him. They even wrote in the home study course that it's unfortunate there's not a term that connotes sexlessness, but calling God it just doesn't work well. So they continued to use HIM to describe the creator in a lot of their writings. But you got to grok that stuff. You got to come to the awareness of that. And that's one of the reasons I did the Secret of Light series, was to help people understand it. And but yeah, there's just some really great stuff that is put out in this science. It's also geometrically correct in a lot of ways. It has and uses sacred geometry as a teaching tool, but that's all part and parcel to his experience in 1921 of 39 days in that state of undivided brain. You could say he was wholly mind, which is not a divided hemispherical awareness, but rather a electrically short-circuited awareness, which would create a non-color spectrum, but rather white light. And so this white light experience is what is classically termed illumination, which there's hundreds of people on the planet who have experienced this illumination experience and written about it, from all different walks of life, different religious practices. There's no place on earth that does not have someone who has experienced it. Black Elk of the Lakota Indian tribe from the Dakotas also had a illumination experience. And what's really wonderful about the Russell teachings is the intensity in which they go into what is illumination and what is this process of acquiring cosmic knowledge without learning. How does one acquire knowledge without learning, without going to the library? So it's interesting to see how they scientifically define the experience, and they each write in Unit 2 of the home study course an in-depth account of their own illumination experiences, which to my mind, I haven't really encountered such a detailed description of the experience itself. One could say it's the least of all experienced human experiences, but I would argue that we all experience it twice in our life, whether we like it or not, and once is at birth and once is at death. But we're fortunate if we experience it in between. And again, it can be likened to inspiration, is literally a mini illumination. Many people become inspired. They're able to write down things or create things or come up with ideas. The light bulb over the head is a symbol, universal symbol of acquiring idea without learning. So we have the ability to tap into that holy mind perspective. And what does a genius do that ordinary people can't do? He thinks with both sides of his brain simultaneously. You know, the danger I see a lot of in, you know, a lot of these truth circles as well is that we only use one side of the brain or the other, which simply isn't true. We're using both sides, only in different degrees. Let's say you might be using the left brain 90% and only 10% while you're taking a test. But if you're, for instance, playing music, you're going to be using both sides more like 60-40, 60 for the technique of the fingers and 40% the inspiration or the what could be called improvisation, if you will. So we're always using a mix of both hemispheres. It just depends on what the task is that you're doing that connotes how much of a percentage. But the genius is able to actually use both sides in pretty fair degree, or wholly minded, you could say. And then the experience of illumination is a wholly minded experience where literally the hemispheres of the brain are short-circuited and you're thinking with wholly mind versus the brain at all, which is where all this new knowledge comes from. It's really great. And this is where this chart all these charts were pulled out of that experience. Literally, he was drawing hundreds of charts and diagrams over those 39 days, as well as 40,000 words of pure poetry that one of the doctors who was attending to him in the early on of the onset of this experience, due to the family, his wife was concerned that, he was in a state of possible bad health. So she called two doctors to come over, or one was a lawyer, one was a doctor, I believe. And they were looking at his work, and one of the gentlemen said, "These writings outwit Walt Whitman. I would recommend you leave him be." So they left him be, and of course, what came out of it was an entire science. And he makes no bones about telling people who read his work that this is where all this came from. In other words, it was a direct inspiration right out of God directly to him. And what's beautiful about it is, no church has ever produced this. No scientists have ever produced anything anywhere close to this. But the only place you can really draw a parallel is the Kabbalion, because there's similar things that came out of this that also, you could say, line up with the Kabbalion, accepting God as a high vibration. That would be the only part that I would not include. So really, Hermeticism is, the core tenets of Hermeticism are these principles that, again, echo through the divine experience. And just, one could say Jesus was a Hermeticist, for God's sakes, because he's saying that the kingdom of heaven is within man and that he and his Father are one. And when all men can say that, you'll have peace on earth, you could say. But lofty goals, but nonetheless, they're universally true.
I was thinking before, when you were talking about Ode and about these space gases being nutrients that we need, and I thought that perhaps we just need to be at a low enough vibration to utilize it, because it's got to be all around us, right? I was watching some videos on some bionic. A bion is something that is in the cells that is charged with Ode. And this research was showing that the cells that were charged with the most bions, those were the cells that were the healthiest. And the ones that weren't very healthy were the ones that were very low on bionic charge. And I got to thinking that perhaps it isn't that we need these nutrients, but that we need to be at a low enough vibration to utilize it. One of the things that I've learned from your Knowing the Creator series is that you don't need to meditate in the way that they teach you. You just need to sit in the pose, in the yogic pose, to meditate. There are many different ways for you to meditate. You can meditate awake. You can commit yourself to a mindset and a way of life which can put you in that place where you can get in touch with that stillness without having to find a spot in nature and put down a magic carpet. You're not trying to escape yourself. You're trying to ground yourself wherever you are. And that's, but yeah, getting back to it, perhaps these nutrients are all around us, just as we have the ability to go within, find that still point wherever we are.
Yeah, there's been accounts of people living on nothing but sunlight. Breatharians. I mean, I'm not saying to give credence to this as a way to mold your life or try to do yourself, but there certainly are accounts of people who are able to simply charge themselves and live on nothing but water and air and sunlight. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that, and I would say too, there's probably beings walking this earth that are so advanced that we have no idea. And they would never reveal themselves, number one, because they know instantly what would happen if they were to, but they can certainly do things while they're here to affect great change, perhaps.
So everything between hydrogen and gold, and I'm talking about the standardized periodic chart, because gold is 78 on the standard one, is what Joel Wallach says is required for humans. Now, plants only need 3 minerals to live. Vertebrates need 60 minerals. Now, I like to combine, especially when it comes to health. There's other people I listen to. Joe Wallach's like right up there at the top for me. I got another guy I listen to called Robert Morse, who's into, his specialty is a raw fruit diet. Frugivores, his idea is that the closest animal to humans is monkeys, and they're frugivores. They eat raw fruit. And he also specializes in the lymphatic system. You think about it, every cell in your body is connected to 4 networks: blood, lymph, fascia, and nerve. So there's a blood capillary, a lymph capillary, connective tissue, fascia, and a nerve cell that connects to every cell in your body. Now the lymph system for him, he specializes in that, and it's not what medical science, they don't recognize its true function, which is like your cells do not dump their waste back into the blood. They dump it into the lymph system. But in any case, I like to take these different people who think completely different, and if I know what they're saying is true, I still have to, in my own mind, figure out how they connect together. I don't expect them to do the extra fucking work for me to come together and reconcile themselves. They're working on completely different aspects, so it's my job. And Wilhelm Reich, talking about the orgone, it makes sense to me, looking at these 24 elements before hydrogen, because then I can just easily say, plug it in to the analogy and say that if you're low on orgone charge, you're deficient in these elements. And seeing as how these 24 elements that are before hydrogen, they're not so much like physical. They are physical, they're material, obviously, but it's like they have no mass, right? As we would think of it. So it's more along the lines of energy. Even though they're physical, even though they're elements, it's more like energy than it is like actual a pill or like a nutritional supplement. You're not going to buy a bottle of like, I carry nutritional supplements with me all day, every day, like a multivitamin. You're not going to get the 24 subtle gases and a multivitamin. So it's going to come from taking a walk in nature, whatever, breathing, or sitting in an orgone accumulator. But it's just as important. They are elements, and being deficient in them is going to lead to problems, just as being deficient in calcium would lead to problems,
Yeah, you got to remember too that certain things are in certain places for certain reasons. I don't know if you've ever heard of Joe Booker from Australia, but he was a sort of a guy who came upon cosmic knowledge by way of a collision with a Mack truck. He survived, but he, several years of therapy and things like that to even be able to walk again and related. But he was able to see the electrical fields around life forms extremely well after this accident, his near-death obvious experience. But he actually developed a car that broke the land speed record in Australia, and it was like a hydrogen kind of mix, but he was actually, rumor has it that his car would float when he started it because he was actually instead of hydrogen, he was utilizing some of the space gas, which made the car lighter than the air. So
what a fantastic story. I mean, just the whole idea of being able to see people's electric field, but then you throw that little cherry on top on the end, and I'm just okay. I need to hear about this guy.
So you took a pill of Quentin, okay, which is in the second octave, you might literally start floating. So you got to be careful there too, because again, this is what you're looking at is with Tomion all the way to the ninth octave is the journey of carbon. So when you're breathing hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, you're breathing the first and second and third octave, only an older version of it, but it's what you're supposed to be breathing. Now you can create the conditions of a first, second, and third octave in perhaps an orgone generator, and you may even feel lighter when you come out of it. So those are all things to consider. But again, you could even reverse aging as well. But what are the effects of that? We don't really know for sure. But again, there are things you would need, but you have to also ask these questions. Could it actually cause further health problems if I was to, say, breathe in gases directly, if you could produce them? So yeah, those are all questions that would obviously, it could cause your lungs to collapse too. We don't know, but we're set up for a certain environment, and it'd be, apropos of us to make sure we, if we could produce these gases.
Well, the cloud buster.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the cloud buster. I do know that helium, obviously, if you fill a balloon with helium, what happens?
I was going to say, though, that it's dangerous to touch. Once you fire up the cloud buster and have it run for a bit, it gets so charged that you need to stand back from it. Like, you certainly can't touch it, but you actually have to stand back from it.
Yep. So you'd want to approach any of these things carefully, scientifically, from a safety standpoint, because we really don't know when we start messing with stuff that's outside of our, especially stuff that populates space and not the earthen plane for a reason. You just have to be careful, again, because these things have their place in nature, and that's outside of the atmosphere. But it's the only thing small enough that can move outside of the atmosphere. And then through vorticular action, these are wound up to produce heat. So the cold of space freezes matter, keeps it from exploding, is breathed in through the electrical vorticular action of the twin opposing vortices, and then the exhalation occurs at the equator, which is also why the ring of fire is right along the equatorial belt. So your most active volcanic activity on planet Earth is all along the equator itself, which is just more proof for that being the zone of exhalation.
When you were talking about the campfire and the smoke from the campfire is burning these subtle gases out, which literally go into outer space.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but think of volcanoes.
Yeah.
They must be doing the exact same thing as a campfire does.
Sure. Well, even a house fire, I've showed up to house fires, and there's a 3-mile plume of nothing but rolling thick black clouds rolling violently up into the higher atmosphere. Talk about an adrenaline push. There's nothing like pulling up to or think of that fire in Ohio when they set that shit on fire from that train derailment, how it just punched a hole in the atmosphere and just kept violently moving upwards. All these are occluded gases that rush to seek their point of rest, like a ball holding under the water. You let it go, it seeks rest on the surface of the water, just like these gases they're seeking their like pressure condition by moving upward toward where they can rest. And they can only rest in space. Otherwise, they wouldn't move upward. So why doesn't smoke just stay level with the earth? Why does it move upward?
Because I mean, if you're in the valleys and mountains and you have a campfire, you'll notice that the smoke will sort of like go down to the creek and travel maybe like 10 feet above the creek down the valley. We know,
Those are the heavier elements, which are
obviously,
probably in your,
yes.
you get into your fourth octave. Those are going to stay lower. But yeah, you'll have a separation between the heavier and the lighter.
Yeah, and the heavier ones will fall back down to the ground earlier, but eventually. But think about a campfire with the wood you're using.
Mhm.
Those trees and the firewood, uh, these subtle gases from the first three octaves are locked in there. The tree's been gathering those gases its entire life. So we know that there's many elements contained in wood, and a lot of that smoke will fall back down to the ground, but that's not to say that these other gases are not there as well. They are.
Correct.
Those are the ones that
Right.
are going to go right up into space.
Correct. And they could obviously, in the foods we eat and things like that, have certain health effects that we're not even aware of. Again, we can't even see them. We can't detect them because they're smaller than hydrogen. That's why Mendeleev put hydrogen as the first element, because they had no way to detect anything smaller. But that's, again, just because we can't detect it doesn't make it non-existent any more than God is non-existent, because our senses can't detect the white light of the undivided brain that causes the brain. Again, in the Russell science, you'll see like helium centers the fourth octave. Literally, we are projections. Our bodies, our physical bodies, our entire earth is a projection from the inert gas helium. And the proof of that is that you can take any element on this earth, put it in a hermetically sealed vacuum tube, and apply enough of a current to it, you will electrocute it into helium. Now, if you go to Mars, which is in the fifth octave, and you were to electrocute any of the substance of Mars, neon would be the resulting gas in that tube, and so on and so forth. So each inert gas is the seed of that octave for all of the matter that is in that octave. And we just happen to be in the place where the idea of man can germinate. It doesn't mean that there's not intelligences on other planets. They just have different forms, which are going to be much less accumulative in terms of matter. There could be gaseous entities living on Saturn or Jupiter in those speeding clouds, for all we know. And intelligence can exist everywhere, but we just don't know, because our bodies would immediately be destroyed if we were to land there, which is one of the reasons Dr. Russell frowned on the idea of extraterrestrials from Venus visiting Earth, because the minute they stepped off their craft into our pressure condition, they would explode. Their bodies couldn't handle the change in the pressure condition unless they had the appropriate attire to be able to keep the pressure condition around them. So they would probably not even be able to step off the craft, number one. So that's just an interesting aside. But, again, it's Jung and Russell were in agreement with the whole idea of UFOs and stuff, not necessarily buying into it as a physical phenomena, but more likely a psychic one.
I remember back in the day, there was a book that Jordan Maxwell recommended, and I never did get it, but the concept was the idea that UFOs are biologically, might even be people. I don't know, that were like maybe like a Buddhist monk kind of deal, like
Yeah,
learned
I've
how
heard
to
about
turn his
that.
body into a UFO or something like that.
Yep. It's the mercurial form. Literally, you're like Mercury, able to travel. You know, that's what the Vihanas, is it called? That you see these tapestries from ancient temples where they're sitting on these what look like UFOs, more or less. So yeah, that's interesting. But is it astral travel? The mind is able to travel anywhere. You can right now picture yourself standing on the sun. It doesn't mean you are, but you can literally stand there. And if you're acute and aware enough, your awareness can actually be where you imagine yourself being. This is what remote viewing is. It's training you to accept as a reality something that's unreal. But it's certainly real in the sense that, there's no time to the mind. It can do, that's where the whole entire idea of future and past comes from. Without memory, we'd have no recognition of the past whatsoever, or ability to forecast a future that has not come yet. So the mind literally is the time machine, but it's not a machine. This is where material science gets it wrong. And again, we discussed spiritualism and how the New Age 1.0 was the 1890s UK, and then became the New Age movement 2.0 in the 60s and 70s and 80s here in the States. But it's interesting too that always after a massive world war, or a war in particular, but the World War in particular, saw a huge resurgence in spiritualism because people lost so many loved ones that they began to contact mediums to try to contact their loved ones. And again, a medium is more or less dealing with a discarnate mind trying to contact it. But if you guys want to read a really cool paper on what happens after death, Dr. Russell was in converse with Clara Clemens, the daughter of Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, and she lost her husband, Osip Gabrilowitsch, the conductor and composer for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and she was distraught and wrote Russell because she had heard, I guess him and Mark Twain were friends, but she had heard through her father that Russell had this experience, and so she contacted him to ask him in particular what happened to her husband. Could she communicate with him? And he wrote an 18-page reply, which is just absolutely brilliant. That's on philosophy.org. And if you click on the articles, under the philosophy articles, you can find that exchange. It's wonderful, very interesting. But yeah, you guys want to move ahead on some more images, try to get a few more in here?
Yes. I'm just trying. I'm trying to remember my point that I was going to bring up with that, with the mediums. Oh yes, the mind and the power of the mind, but not just the power, but the unknown, unseen abilities of the mind. If you've ever seen someone who is hypnotized, what's happening to the mind there, that they're able to. I've seen old Pathe videos where people who are hypnotized, they are suggested that they go as stiff as a board, and they lift them up onto a chair, and they are as stiff as a board. They separate the two chairs. Someone, and even two people, can stand on this person and they not move an inch.
Yeah.
Now, what is going on there? What's going on with the mind? Where and what are the unseen capabilities of the body as well?
Sure.
That person, if they were consciously awake, could they do that without flinching? Could they? Maybe it's possible with training, but for that to happen, there's something going on with the bodies, the body's capabilities right there and then. Perhaps maybe like an immediate suggestion to become as stiff as a board, you'd have to charge your body like really quickly to be able to pull off that kind of performance, I'd say.
Well, that means the mind is really the power. And so could you cure cancer if someone hypnotized you and said, you're riddled with cancer, but you're cured now? Would the mind be powerful enough to cure it? How many times have we heard the placebo effect as being a real demonstrable thing that somebody thinks they're taking a experimental wonder drug and they have literally cured themselves of their cancer? Are these the things the elite want to hide from us, that we live, in fact, in a mind wave universe? That if you could go into the zero of your inert gases, which center all your cells, and become helium and reproject a healthy image of yourself from the age of 20 into the place of your body now, that your cells would digress in age and all the cancer and all the anomalous disease and everything else in your body would suddenly be reversed? Could this be why people live to be 1,000 years old, in the millennia past? And what did they know about the mind that we've forgotten or that has been hidden from us? These are all valid questions that I think a science like this can help to answer. And for a lot of people, it's Russell said himself, he was given the power to heal himself at 14. He was pronounced dead on the table, died of black diphtheria. 2 doctors were standing over him and looked at the parents and said, "We're sorry, your son is gone." And they began to weep, and he was watching this. And he said, God took him up upon a high mountain. This is figurative, of course. He took him into the zero of himself and rebroadcast, reprojected a healthy image of himself. And he sat up on the table, and they looked in his throat, and it was pink. The black of his throat was gone. Because a black diphtheria turns the throat black. The flesh literally turns it black like a casement. And he was completely healed. And his parents began to weep. And he said he would have been perfectly healed had it not been for their reaction, freaking out over the fact that he came back to life and was completely healed, which caused him to fall back into a minor version of the sickness, which took him 6 months to get over. But had they been able to accept the fact that he was completely healed, he would have been totally able to just get up off the table and start walking. But yeah, he was completely 100% healed. His throat was back to the pink color that it should be. And that was his one every 7 years, he had a major illumination. And at the age of 14, around his birthday, that was the illumination experience. Was basically he had been pronounced dead and then came back to life completely cured. So that's
that's incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of incredible stories around this man, and the fact that he wrote about illumination as being something that always happened around his birthday. But every 7 years, from the age of 7, he would have a major illumination, minor ones on the off years. But 7 times 7 at the age of 49 around his birthday, which also happened to be a massive solar event, CME, which caused telegraph lines in New York and Connecticut to burst into flames. He sought refuge in his studio and for 39 days was in a state of divine illumination, which is where all these charts and drawings come from.
That's the beauty sounds like a Marvel hero, like an actual Marvel hero.
Well, his whole life, he said, was to demonstrate his knowing God within him. That was his purpose. So he mastered all the 5 fine arts, which nobody's done, to my knowledge. Maybe Da Vinci has come close, or Michelangelo. Michelangelo did sculpt, he painted, he wrote poetry, but I don't think he was musical necessarily. I may be wrong, but there's been very few, in other words, what the point I'm trying to make is that there's been very few humans who have mastered one fine art, let alone all 5 of them in one lifetime. And so that was his way of God commanding him to show the world that, yeah, you should listen to this guy, because what he's saying isn't just, he's not delivering a message because he just wants to or because he wants to gain notoriety. He's delivering it, but he also has credibility in the fact that he's one of the most versatile human beings on earth. And so you should respect and listen to and take an honest look and approach when you when you see this work and what it means.
He's very much a William Blake of
in many
his
regards.
era.
And he even quotes Blake here and there. I know they had both cited Dr. Richard Morris Buck's work called Cosmic Consciousness, which Buck listed 40 of the most prominent cases of illumination, and William Blake was one of them. And there's a certain meter and pattern to the writing of these human beings that have experienced this experience. It's given away by their words. And when you know what to look for, which to me, Russell, I like to say, was a secret decoder of sorts. He gave us a Rosetta Stone of how to understand that perhaps what this experience is, and how to point it out in the writings of authors and others. And I was able to do that once I understood, his writings enough. I was able to go back and read things I had read previous and go, oh my God, this is, like Emily Bronte, No Coward Soul Is Mine, her poem, she literally is writing of a divine illumination in her poem. And it suddenly made sense when before I had read it, it was like, what the hell is she talking about? That's why also a lot of academicians think Walt Whitman was writing to his gay lover. He wasn't. He was writing poems to God about his love affair with the Creator in the illumination experience during his trips to the woods and writing poetry by himself. It's something that, unfortunately, the physicalists and the materialists always get wrong, because they always want to place the mind as being part of the body, as opposed to the transcendent organ that it is. It's beyond an organ, you could say. It is the organ or it is the air that makes the sound, as opposed to being the pipes or the machinery of it. So there's much we can grok from a Russell when you begin to look into his life in this way.
Just going back to the lighter elements of the space gases, I wanted to go back to that a little bit, because it seems as though if we did manage to get our heads around this idea that we should be trying to find our vocation in life, that it's going to encourage us to live a better life, instead of, say, just living for money or for material gain, that you're actually fulfilling your soul's passion. And getting back to that, if we could find a way to maximize that, the meditation that was suggested earlier, if we were able to absorb these elements better, and you said it would make us feel lighter. Now, everybody wants to feel a bit lighter. They don't want to feel as heavy. People go about it the wrong way, right? They think that God's making them feel lighter when they go to church, or they act as a collective. There's something psychological going on there. There's diffused responsibility happening when a massive group gets together like that. So you're all sharing the weight, which is fine. But when you're still living a life for material gain, and living a life that's extremely stressful, you're busy all the time. Most people aren't able to make ends meet. And that causes a lot of cortisol release. Like their lives are geared towards that tension all the time. They had a way to step out of that. One of the things that Michael Tsarian said was, just start by, how about you just recognize the spaces in your breath. When you take a breath, do you ever even notice the inhalation? Do you ever take a step outside of yourself and just mark it down and have an awareness that it's actually happening? Most people go through their lives and don't care about that at all. They don't think, when they're taking a breath, how long it takes to exhale. That that alone makes you more aware of your body, but puts you in there. From there, you can go further deeper in if you want to meditate. But I was just thinking about that, and thinking about Russell and his meditation capabilities. Did he talk about this a lot? And I'm assuming he practiced it and he was a master at it.
Oh yeah. Well, he would live from the zero, you could say, which is the center line, which is the mind. Living a mind existence through the mind outwardly toward the physical, as opposed to living from the physical or the senses in reverse. So if you're living a life of hedonism, the hedonistic lifestyle is one of always pleasuring the senses versus fulfilling the commands and the dreams and the goals and aspirations of the mind. And there is your demarcation line between mediocrity, which is also Satanism, which is a heavy emphasis on simply matter, material, and living for the senses, to fulfill what are called the seven deadly sins, you could say. Lust, gluttony, things of that nature are sensed-based existences only, where the genius lives for the inner gratification of the light of the mind. And so there you have your sort of your demarcation. He was a meditator in the sense that he termed it waking meditation. He said a man could be, and that's where you hear the symphonies. That's where you hear the great ideas, the dialogue of the internal, are where these great ideas come to you. You can literally be sitting on a bench in a crowded subway, Russell would say, and he would hear symphonies where the man next to him would be thinking, I wish the train would hurry up and get here because I'm going to be late for work. Yet they're sitting right next to each other on the same bench. So what's the difference, right? One man is watching his watch. Why I don't wear a watch, for one reason, is that, one of the things you'll notice in a creative environment is you lose track of time. And that actually, the creative process is the anti-aging process. You don't age when you aren't paying attention to time. Interestingly enough, things slow down, body processes slow down, you become more still, especially if you're writing or video editing, let's say. And I'm sure, Nate, you probably been in a pretty heavy video editing phase and looked up at the clock and realized 6 or 7 hours have gone by and you haven't even stopped to eat or take a drink of water. These are the creative moments that bring the ecstasy to the soul. It's when you notice that you stop noticing time is a wonderful feeling, really, truly. But how often do we chase that? We're kind of always wondering, I don't want to be late or don't want to miss this appointment or do that or blah, blah, blah. There's so many things that take our minds off of where we are and what we're doing. But my favorite thing Walter said about meditation was that a person could achieve waking meditation. And literally, if you look at this graph, the zero is the waking meditation, the balance between the hemispheres. And each of these lines to the left and the right have red male and blue female with a centering yellow, which is the combination of these locking potentials into the crest of that wave, which hydrogen is the crest of the third and fourth octave, or the third and a half octave, you could say. And then carbon is the crest of the wave for the fourth and a half octave. So 4.5, which again, everything is either becoming carbon or carbon dying carbon. So this chart here literally is more than just a chemical chart. You could line up the hemispheres of the brain in the fourth and fifth octave there. And but every crest also is centered by that light. So at the center of carbon, center of the sun is a white light between the color spectrum, which is why the sun appears to be white sometimes. But that light is literally the reality that broadcasts through these inert gases into the color spectrum. Again, we could cite Goethe and his color wheel. He spins it, it turns white. Could take a prism of white light and you shine through it and you see the color spectrum. So literally that's what the creative mind is. It's God shining through the inert gases, which are the closest elements to that white light, and they are the projection mechanism of the white light into the color spectrum.
You
And
said
so,
the waking meditation, that's where the music comes from. That's where the Mozarts come from, the Beethovens. And I immediately had this flash into my mind. Was this idea of getting in touch with the 0 point of
there
the
you go.
wave, the still point. And then if you ever look at this graph, this is exactly the way the octaves of a musical scale look like as well.
There you go. And what do you do if you become the 0 of your own body, of your own matter?
You become the fool, the beginner. You start again.
In a sense, but you also become the master. You then can rightly command the matter of your body to obey your mind, as opposed to being commanded by the matter to obey the matter. And there is the difference between mediocrity and genius.
Right. Of course.
So those who are commanded by matter little produce. Those who command matter are called producers. They produce a variety of things, from products to great works of art to compositions of music. You know, they're not limited by the demands of the body. The body is a appendage of the mind. It works for the mind that commands it. And what you do is you take that 0, the 0 element of thought, which is a 0. It's got no form, no matter. You can't weigh a thought on a scale. But you can hold these thoughts and you can build bodies for them using the wave of creation, which is your body is part of that wave of creation. And through your own 2 strong arms, you can carve a David out of granite, solid granite or marble or limestone or whatever medium you choose to use. You could also create an over unity device that helps the whole world to have more time to pursue the dreams of the soul versus the needs of a runaway civilization that is whose God is matter, you know. And again, you can also understand the process of mind as a dynamic instrument versus being something to be controlled. You know, people use mind for all kinds of things, nefarious and good, but free will grants us that. And the correct use of it will be abundance. The incorrect use of the mind will always produce scarcity. And that goes for all of us as individuals as much as it does all of us as a collective.
What a great quote to end it on. Caleb, I believe you have to leave soon, right?
Actually, I just got another hour, so I'm good for another hour.
Excellent. Fantastic. All right. Where do we want to go from here then?
What are we looking like on the images?
I think we were at this one last time, right? This was the one that we had last time, I think. Well, I didn't hear that, Caleb. You say that again.
Well, it took Goku a long time to get across that one. I'm riffing on the analogy. I'll send you that video after the interview. It looks just like that chart, this bridge that Goku had to go over.
Oh yeah, I can concur with this. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to Dragon Ball Z. Okay,
yeah,
on this one.
This is where we should start because we never did get to this one.
No problem.
Yeah.
Yep. And basically what you're going to see is always 4 pairs, 4 compressive windings, or 4 sets of mates. So the ones are more obviously unwound. And as you move toward from a 0 condition, of course, is the inert gases, the light projects through the inert gases from both left to center and right to center, which are male and female, and they move spirally. Your locking potentials are the +1 of the rings, which begin to fill in, the +2, the +3, and finally the +4 centered by 0, +4. And then it unwinds in the same way through the equators.
You have the compression and the unwinding or expansion occurring simultaneously. So
That's
is it
correct.
sort of like a constant hum, or is it more like a pulsation, or what?
Well, matter does pulse. I mean, there's certainly the pulse beat is the heartbeat of the universe. I think you might have a slide in here for the universal pulse beat, which are the anode and the cathode condition of matter. But the anode could be considered the in-breath at the point of reversal is a 0. So you have to go the other direction. And then the cathode would be exhalation, the end of exhalation, which is the unwinding of the compression, which would be another 0 where you have to, again, reverse. And so all motions are reversals, simultaneous reversals. When you breathe in, you're charging, but your skin is actually exhaling. And when you exhale, your skin is charging. So the endometrial layer itself is doing something in reverse to the breath, which is interesting. So you have the blue blood and you have the red blood, charged blood, discharged blood. That's why your veins get that color. See sometimes the opposites that occur simultaneously. But yeah, he likened in this particular illustration the winding of the cosmic clock spring. The spring winds up, red intensifies gravity and multiplies, blue intensifies as gravity divides. That you could just perfectly line that up as well with the breathing cycle, the color of the blood, for instance. And the analysis of the harp string, you'll always notice the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 centered by 0. So the two locking potentials are a series of 4 steps to become matter and unwind in the same way at the equator at 90 degrees. And again, its mind is always at 90 degrees to motion. So the immaterial is always at 90 degrees to motion. The power is always at 90 degrees to motion. So where's the power of a seesaw? Is it in the 2 kids that are riding on it, or is it in the fulcrum? In other words, the lever is not where you find the power. It's in that which the lever moves upon that all your power is drawn to express the motion that it expresses. And our senses, unfortunately, only notice the motion. How often do you notice the door jam when you open the door? How often do you notice what doesn't move as opposed to what's moving? Well, we always notice what's moving because our senses can't respond to stillness. There's a lack of sense in stillness or a lack of sense in silence, but that's where you hear the symphonies. That's where you see the great portraits or carved marble stone into your finalized product of an image in your mind. All thought is stillness and silence. Why do we discount it as having no existence when that's everything? He says it's a process of emergence of the dynamic universe from the static. And the radar mirrors, this is interesting. It's basically what he's showing you, again, what Walter's science truly is an optical universe. It's a science of optics as much as it is spirit matter, but it's the optical way that light is projected from the light of mind into the matter of form. And he basically calls the principle upon which the universe is founded the love principle, that God is love, that it can be nothing else but, which is just a very interesting way to put it. I don't think we really understand what the term love means in its use here, but it's something we certainly have the capability of understanding. The radar mirrors, all radar mirrors manifest the love principle upon which this universe is founded. Every wave is a sphere. We can see that with sound waves. There's been work done on that to show that sound actually travels in the form of a sphere. It's interesting how spheres are everywhere, including our own eyeballs. Spheres are divided by 3 inertial planes, 3 inner planes, horizontal, vertical. They're bounded by the 6 overtones, reflection mirrors, which re-give. Spheres and cubes are God's only tools. Beautiful. Okay. Cubes expand and compress as spheres expand and compress. So each, as Caleb said, it's a simultaneous. All things everywhere are simultaneously expanding and compressing. So he goes more into the lenses that are created, the two foci, or foci, whichever way you choose to pronounce it. And the intersections create the lenses. Lenses are oblate spheres, spheroids, and ellipses. They have two foci. Convex lenses compress, concave lenses expand. If you've ever played with a magnifying glass and lit a leaf on fire, what you're doing is you're compressing the expanded rays of the sun into a compressed optical condition, which then sets the leaf on fire. And that is, of course, a convex lens. Concave will expand rays of light. So what he's literally telling us is the light of the creator is compressed through the intersections of the spheres and the cubes, which create these foci at wave intersections, which are then extended to create even more. The material universe is created and destroyed by the curvature of gravity. Gravity being stillness, the motion that moves around that stillness is compressed and expanded into the many different forms of the elements as well as bodies in motion. And this illustrates the universality and balanced rhythmic symmetry of lenses and spheres and of intersecting waves. It is repeated by the 9 radar mirrors of the cube.
So when you were saying that it compresses the sun's optical lenses, I have a book here called The Box Saga. In the very beginning, I noticed these lenses are rings as well. You could call them rings, right?
Correct.
And one of the first quotes in the book is, Odin is a ring. Odin is everything. Odin has always been and Odin will always be. Odin is the sun. The Box Saga is a very old telling of a family tree that stretches back all the way to the original human beings on the planet. And in the Box Saga, it also says that the earth was once a sun. But getting back to what I see here is rings interacting with rings, intersecting and having some kind of effect on each other so that they can transmit light, they can express the creator's ideas through this medium.
Well, you'd see that too with rainbows. I mean, rainbow is sort of an optical effect of intersecting. So yeah, it's the whole of creation is an optical illusion, you could say. And we even have wave intersections that occur in the eye, the spherical eyeball, and the lenses in the eye itself. Without those lenses, we would not be able to see anything. So these sort of have like the third center picture there. Lenses are oblate spheres, spheroids, and ellipsoids with two foci. You could also say that this is sort of the optics that our eyes see. Literally, our eyeballs are similar in a lot of ways with this chart and the way that we see and how we see what we see. Go ahead.
Also how the universe sees as well.
Yeah. Yep. And you have the classical Vesica Pisces as well in that third photo where those rings overlap to produce what in alchemy is where they usually put the savior child, is in that Vesica Pisces. That's also a symbol of the third eye because your pineal is one of the central organs of the brain, right on the dividing line between the hemispheres of the brain. It's centering the brain. It's what Descartes said was the seat of the soul, or the eye of the soul. I refer to it as the eye of the heart, but that literally is ancient alchemy as well. Yeah, it ties two together, which I did a heavy study on alchemy before I discovered Walter Russell. So this was naturally like the place to go. When I began to encounter his drawings, I'm like, my God, this is so similar to what's in my book of alchemical drawings that I bought. Can't remember the name of it, but it's a very thick book of about 1,000 some pages of all the alchemical drawings that come from antiquity. Just fantastic, though. But what Russell does, unlike alchemy, is he three-dimensionalizes all of it. So to go from squares and circles to cubes and spheres, which is a very interesting evolution. And it takes science it takes a ancient science more or less and updates it. So this is really alchemy 2.0, you could say, or 3.0, if you want to get technically correct terminologically. It is a three-dimensional science and a three-dimensional alchemy.
The space cube here turns up again, and I just kind of wanted to quickly go back to this, and I was actually drawing this on a whiteboard for my son. I was just like letting him look at the shapes, and also I was having a lot of fun drawing these 3D shapes. And when I was drawing it, I realized, oh wow, that's the Maltese cross, that's the pyramid. You have other crosses here used by the Knights Templar. It's very hard not to see this shape once you draw it and meditate on it. You see these symbols in these, let's say, prestigious elite families, and you have to wonder just what kind of knowledge, not, I wouldn't say well learned in, but I would say that they employ certain people who do have that knowledge, who they have paid a handsome sum to do it for them. And yes, there is definitely something in these symbols which is talking about how the universe sees all, and at the same time, there are angles at which, if performed upon in a certain way, say if you were trying to manipulate bioenergetic vortices, or if you're trying to collect a bunch of people to do that for you, or even if you just wanted to misalign certain monuments on the planet that you knew were there for a specific reason to keep these kind of dimensions, this kind of geometry working in a certain flow with a certain set of timings. If you wanted to affect all these, you could start to affect the universe in a way that is unnatural.
Go back 3 slides,
Not
because you
this
see
one, yeah?
there. Now, if you, on the right side there, on the right quadrant of the circle, that's part of the Maltese cross. Now, if you had that at every 4 parts of the circle, that would be a complete Maltese cross. I actually think one of those spirals, maybe there's another spiral picture that actually has all of them. But that tells me that, well, let's look at history for a second. After the Crusades, the Templars really got established. I mean, they were established before, but I'm saying like they were firmly established after the Crusades, and they employ the symbolism of a fourfold cross. But even though it's a fourfold cross, it's really 8. It's really based on 8. And you'll see in other symbols that they have octagons and octograms, and you see that the Templar cross with these 4 things is a pyramid laid out flat. So if you were to push the point of the pyramid down, and researchers have shown this, especially Sean Cross, if you flatten out a pyramid, that's what it is, the Templar cross. But even the pyramid itself, Brian Forrester has shown, is 8-sided, because each of those 4 sides that you think of with the pyramid are actually bent in just enough that it's significant to count each side as 8 sides, right? So you're dealing with a similar structure as what we've been looking at this whole time with all of these drawings, because each of these drawings we've been looking at has a center point and 8 radial arms, so to speak. But let's look further back in history. The Templars really are known for the Crusades. Well, what happened in the Crusades? The first place that the Crusades went was Edessa, and that ties into Ralph Fellus's work. And he shows that the significance of that was they were connecting their lineage to the royal line of Edessa, which was Egyptian, Parthian, Greek royalty. And they were knowledgeable in the precession of the equinoxes and some very advanced mathematics. So they were drawing on that. So the Templars certainly did not invent the knowledge. Their symbolism is based on something earlier. So we're already saying an Egyptian strain from that Egyptian royal line of Edessa. But what happened before the Crusades, slightly before the Crusades? Yaki Hagstrom and the Bach Saga guys have shown that there was a crusade before the Crusade, because the famous crusade didn't happen until the 1100s. But the Bach Saga guys have really shown that there was a crusade before the crusade, which happened in 1050. And that was a crusade to crush the pagans. The last stronghold of the pagans, which was in Scandinavia.
Is that where they get their term hell from? The way the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
The very word health. I mean, that tells you everything right there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Why would they demonize that word?
Well, the people up there were using an alphabet known as the runes, and I've seen it shown how each rune can be seen in an octagram. In other words, if you make an 8-pointed star, essentially, with connecting lines in between each point, and also the point in the middle radiating to each of the outside points. All of those lines, you can identify each and every single rune in that star, the octagram. Now, it all ties together for me, because how many runes are there? 24. And there's how many elements are lighter than hydrogen? 24.
21, actually.
Well, go back to that slide, Nathan, because there's 24 indicated on the chart. I mean,
which slide? Oh, the elements slide, yeah?
yes.
Let's have a look.
Well, I'll just finish up.
I got it.
Yeah, so that block in the upper left-hand corner here has 21, I believe. But there's 21 there. But zoom into hydrogen, Nate. What's not included in that little insert at the top left is these 3 that lead up to hydrogen over here. So altogether, that makes 24, right? It's not including carbogen, ethylogen, and bebagen. If you count those 3 in addition to the 21, that's 24.
Yeah, that's you're moving into your
3 octaves. 3 times 8 is 24. So I'm counting it as 24 based on this.
I got you. So your first half of the third octave, what he's showing you is there's 21 fully tone elements prior to hydrogen in that little square. Yeah, if you count the 3 there, you're gonna have 24. I got you.
Yeah. And then just wrapping up my thought here is that the story of the origin of the runes is similar to an illumination experience, where you have Odin, who hung on a tree upside down with one of his eyes plucked out. It's like this very dramatic thing, with bleeding from a wound for 9 days, hanging upside down on a tree. And finally, at the end of 9 days, he was able to perceive the runes. So we know that a lot of these illumination experiences, as you've said, with this guy who drowns himself practically, and then some of the techniques employed are not gentle techniques, but it's just interesting to me. So you have that whole strain, and one more thing that will really cinch all this up is that, according to the Bach Saga guys, Egypt and the pyramids originate from Helsinki, the hell, so to speak, the north. So it was the runes and the knowledge of from the north would have preceded Egypt. And Commons Beaumont has a similar statement that he makes. He centers it on Britain, but that's kind of a minor detail. I think it ties in, though, if we look at the broader context. You have the extreme north, which for Commons Beaumont, the extreme north was Britain, but it doesn't really matter whether it's Helsinki or Britain or whatever. We're looking far up north for the origin of, maybe it was the first people who had the illumination experience or something. So it may have been that all of this, the runes, the pyramids, and all of this is just sort of like photocopy machine. And by the time you get to the Templars, basically, it's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of some older, somebody actually had an illumination experience a long time ago, as is exemplified in the story of Odin. And they recorded that, and designed the pyramids based on that. The pyramids may have been a photocopy of some older knowledge of someone who had the illumination experience and conveyed it to his fellows, and that knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. But no longer, if one person has an illumination experience and passes down some sort of manuscript or oral tradition, if nobody else is following up behind them with an illumination experience of their own, then the best they can do is simply make the effort to convey what was handed to them and hand it down in its the purest form as they can. And I think that's happened through history, is where somebody has an illumination and then they pass it down, but the people they're passing it down to aren't necessarily having their own experiences. So at best,
that's where religions start.
well, I mean, even at best, if say the people as custodians or pure of heart, etc., want to serve the truth, even then, it's sort of like if I were to open up a book with a picture in it, take it to the photocopier, print it off, take that print off and photo scan it and print it off, and take that print off and photo scan it and print it off. The quality is going to deteriorate the more I do that. And if things are getting passed down from generation to generation without it really being renewed from the source, from the creator, it's going to deteriorate in its trueness and its quality and its pureness.
That's why Russell would say that God sends messengers periodically, historically, throughout the ages of mankind. And one way that we can deduce how ancient civilizations all had the same knowledge base was not necessarily due to an advanced civilization or extraterrestrials visiting all these different places. What was visiting these different places were illumination experiences in each of these different peoples scattered around the earth And they were shown the same cosmic knowledge by way of this experience, which is how they would get similar construction. See, we always look for a physical explanation in everything. As materialists of a Western mindset, we are unfortunately, and this is why a lot of the great minds get shunned by academia, is because our physicalists pretty much run the institutions and look at what's happening to it. Look at what's happening to these institutions. Is not the grossest materialist political philosophy communism? And we're seeing it take over the university systems. Is this not the pure example of the extent? We are literally seeing the end of materialism. And what is it doing? It's destroying everything. So yeah, I mean, this science that Walter brought was a divine charge. He was commanded to give it to the academicians, and the first thing they did with it was created atomic weapons. I mean, maybe, that's, you got to ask yourself, is it always a good thing to give people stuff they're not ready for,
And now they're turning people into weapons. And if we have a look at what's on the screen right now, you were talking about universities there.
Oh, yeah.
This is real hot in English universities. Extinction Rebellion.
Oh, yeah.
We'll notice here that
Columbia is all but in flames in New York. I mean, it's one of the most pristine, elite universities, and it's completely overrun. It's lawless, and this again is a political ideology of gross materialism, is what communism is. It's soulless. These people, the ranks of communism are filled with the self-murdered, and it's exactly what all the great minds tried to warn us of. The Gustav Le Bons and Carl Jungs and how many people have written on the psychology of the crowd and its dangers, and it takes to even be counted among its ranks. One must be self-extinct. You must have no self that's the qualification to be able to join.
So Sethicus Boza has mentioned the idea that runes, when they're twisted, is making the energy sort of inverted, sort of like black magic. Sort of the same concept as when the Satanists will take a crucifix symbol and turn it upside down.
Yeah, inversion is the signature of that whole movement. Yep.
Right. And he gives the example of the peace symbol. The peace sign is actually an upside down rune called algaes, and when it's right side up, it's like a tree, or like an elk, because it actually means elk. And the ideas to that rune in its proper form really makes sense why you get the sort of kind of vibes and stuff that you get when you have it being used in the upside down way. So that Extinction Rebellion sign is actually a rune, but it's turned on its side, because a rune turned the other way, when it's turned like this, there's a rune called Dagas. There it is, which the meaning of it is day, awakening, enlightenment. So they're turning that on its side.
Sure.
The results.
It's one half of the space cube, right? As well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they're turning on its side. They're only providing half the picture. And as we see a diagram, one of Walter Russell's diagrams, explaining the vortices of the planet. But I imagine not just the vortices of the planet, but also of space itself. Am I correct?
Of any body in motion.
Anybody.
An atom of granite, same thing. You have twin opposing vortices in every one of your cells.
And it just happens to be the symbol for Extinction Rebellion. as well, which I thought was, I also think it's an egg timer, but I also think it's a magical symbol. And it is interesting that we were talking about denigrating the Earth's energies, denigrating their own energy, denigrating the energy of space itself, or turning it against itself, or even just to raise the in quotes here, raise the vibration of the people who get involved in these kinds of organizations, which are heavily occult and are run by occultists as well, especially Black Lives Matter. This was actually headline news, not so much Extinction Rebellion, but Black Lives Matter, which pretty much do the same thing.
Well, they're all cultish in their origins, and their practices are very cult-like. It's easy to pick out once you know what to look for. David Whitehead did a great presentation on several different parts on cults and how they operate, especially cult of the medics, of course. You can't unsee that once you see it, but that's why I love to say about Walter Russell's work, anybody that truly understands it correctly will realize that it's absolutely cult-proof in every way, shape, and form, because there's no middlemen. You don't answer to anybody but the spirit within you, which is the creator, as your spirit is part of its spirit and you connect with it, which is that zero within the inert gas that centers you. And your projection of your own body is projected by this divine light. And you either know that you're a part of it, or you forever wander in the dark, wondering. And that's what the great alchemical transmutation / transfiguration truly is the realization of your mind as the cause of yourself. But so few ever realize that in life. They wander in the effects of a polarized universe, not knowing anything about their own divine unity with that source of all power, which rests at 90 degrees and dead center of yourself.
This diagram here should be a diagram which inspires people to create free energy, or should I say acquired energy. We need to change the definition of this one, but a device which brings the energy to us, which is all around us, and we can hone it and concentrate it so we can use it. But instead, it becomes a device which inverts that whole idea, probably to make sure that people are always at a vibration, so they never get to know their own greatness, so they never get in touch with their own genius.
Right. Well, it's pitting motion against itself. You can't have a fight if you don't put two things into motion. If one is still and the other's moving, you have harmony, you have coordination. If two motions are competing, you get obliteration, you get destruction. And this is as old as time, but it's what these elites do. You ever heard the term war? I mean, how many human beings have died at the hands of overlords who magically craft forces against each other with but one outcome, which is mutually assured self-destruction, which is why it's considered mad to even do that. I mean, as long as man's mind is not part of the equation, you'll always have body dwellers ready to, commit atrocities against one another. And that's why a mind science like Russell brings, where man can learn to acknowledge that stillness and silence within his own being, is the antidote. Because if you and your creator are the only one that you do conferences with, that you take your orders from, which is divine, which is always in balance with nature, which is the cause of nature, then your mind and God's mind as one cannot be infiltrated. There can be no man between you and that, ever. And that is the true inoculation of the alchemists. That is the philosopher's stone.
I think
being aware of cause.
What you're saying is so sensitive, and they really don't want it to get out. It's actually, you've just started glitching a little bit in your signal. Do you think you could go back and just say what you were saying again, please? I think it's really important.
Yeah. Man and his relationship to the divine within him. It's a one-to-one. It's a secret order that I'm actually, I call it the OOTO, and it stands for Order of the One, but there can only be one member, you and the creator as one. So
Oh, that's excellent.
people want to ask me if I'm in a secret order. Actually, I am, but I'm the only member of it. And nobody else is allowed to join. You see, it's myself and God, which is my conscience. And I listen to that conscience. And as of March 4th, 2009, when I committed to go and sin no more, over these many years, that voice becomes louder, more trusting. I can trust it way more than I can trust the voice of a man, of any man. There's no man I can trust more than that voice. So it's sort of learning to speak and listen to that divine side of yourself, which is the causal factor, which is the mind within. It's that which sits at the center of everything and is the stillness and the silence of all motion and all sound. So there's no greater union than that of you and your own conscience, which again is that creator within. The recognition of one's own divinity is the source of all power. And to the alchemist, it's the philosopher's stone, which is the awareness of cause itself. And this is the beauty of it from a philosophical. There's nothing that a man cannot do when he becomes aware of this power within him. Nothing. Now, how he may get to from point A to point Z is a whole different story, because you have to set things into motion. But really, it's our own recognition of that divine source within, that the more you recognize it, the more you commune with it. And I don't mean just once a week on Sunday. I mean moment to moment. People often ask me, what is my spiritual practice? I'll say I don't have one, and I'm not religious. And they're like, well, what are you doing talking about God then? Well, I live God. I don't just talk, I live it. Every breath I take, I'm living it.
Yeah.
It's not separate from me. It never was separate from me. What I used to believe as being separate from me was an illusion, but I couldn't lift my little finger to pick my nose if I wasn't powered by this divine light, which is the undivided. And it's within all of us. Just simply awaiting our recognition of it. And it does deliver messages from time to time in the form of ideas, inspirations. You might get a feeling, don't go down that road. Next thing you know, there's a car accident that direction. I mean, this is the conscience. Always let your conscience be your guide was a message as old as time, but they don't put it into cartoons anymore like they used to. But, all these things that we seek in the external world are readily available to us in our internal world. And we can create a dialogue with that omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent power that supplies the ability for us to even move. But it doesn't come accidentally, and it doesn't come like some reward. It's gradual and it's cumulative based on your desire to work with it knowingly. And that to me is what the foundation of Russell's philosophy is how to work knowingly with God. And that's what he said was the number one thing that he was to demonstrate to his fellow man, that we all have this ability and that we can master all the 5 fine arts if we know how to use it correctly. And there's nothing we have to fear from any men or their inversion tactics once we understand our own immortality and how we can use that in our everyday lives.
Yeah, you were talking there, inspiration. I brought this up briefly last time, but the art of guessing. I mean, when I was in schools, the pressure was on for you to know the right answer. And if you guessed incorrectly, sometimes you'd really get slandered for your guess, even if it was wild or way out there. But guessing used to be a holy thing. It used to be a magical thing, even as a divine act. Guessing comes from a word that's close to Geist, which means spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It comes also from the word geese, which is a sort of duck, right? It's it's a very vocal, rather large duck. And these things do more traveling than me. And They can be quite scary and sound like some sort of demon choking, you know. It's but there's a reason why. The way that these geese go off sometimes as well, it's they have a way of scaring you off or anything that comes near them that they don't like. It sounds like a pure guttural sound, like it comes from the very core of them, you know. It shrieks in your ears. It's almost like someone twisting metal. But anyway, getting back to it, yeah, the whole idea of Mother Goose and the ideas from the egg, the world egg. You have Mithras breaking out of the world egg, and the whole Promethean spirit that comes with the idea of Mithras as a solar hero. But yes, there's a lot to unpack here, because the whole idea of space as an egg as well, Mother Earth as an egg. If we look at the rings, actually, the whole idea of Earth having its own rings, if you look at the ocean bed, it polarizes from what we'd say positive to negative, magnetic charge. And the theory of that is that as the Earth's expanded, it's created these rings. And so even in the planet, you can see male to female, which is a big idea that runs through Walter Russell's work, is it not?
Yeah, well, he updated his ideas about electricity. He originally in Universal One proposed that there was a negative electricity, but he rid himself of that idea. In later examples of his work, began to look at electricity as two positive efforts versus a positive and a negative. And that makes more sense in terms of, you don't look at necessarily the female as a negative electricity, because it takes two positive efforts to produce an offspring. The male and the female must come together as one. But yeah, the later renditions of Walter's science basically restated the purpose of electricity as being two positive efforts. So he made his diagrams from a plus and a minus to a plus and a plus, meaning they come together as one through two positive efforts. And the way I like to give that for people to better grok that as an example is, one of your lungs is not positive and the other negative. They're both a positive compressive charge, and the negation is in the exhalation. But yeah, the gist of Russell science is we live in an optical universe, and the universe is an electric universe. So electricity itself is the great divider, which divides motion from stillness, or I should say divides stillness into motion. And then those are two positive efforts that become one at the crest of every wave and every octave. Not only does it form tone, color, but also forms sound, forms matter, forms bodies. All bodies are doubly charged with two positive efforts of male and female through vorticular action. And at the equator of that vortice, it unwinds into the heat that is given off from that polarization process. And there's a simultaneous rhythmic balanced interchange that continues from the moment of the inception of that body into the moment of its demise. So it's a continuous rhythmic balanced interchange, which was his one law that he was commanded to give to man, that all matter is a more or less a set of periodicities which interchange in the journey of one element. So the story of creation is the journey of one element into becoming carbon, which is the most balanced of all the elements, into its death state and return back again to the screen of space. So it's the journey of matter from space into form, and from form back into space. And it's a beautiful, it lines right up with Hermeticism, it lines right up with alchemy, but it's given a three-dimensional form versus a two-dimensional. And then it's just a more updated version of an ancient story of creation, you could say, which has been told all over the planet through different races and different locales, but it's more or less the same story told in many different ways And it's a language unto itself. Russell called it the language of light. And if you can learn to speak that language, you can deduce great truths from all kinds of different origins, because you understand that what you're reading as you translate it is the same story, just said a different way. So it's really a universal language that you're learning when you study the Russell science and philosophy. It's especially helpful being of a Western mindset, because a lot of the comparative religious studies I did just didn't make any sense. Especially, I never felt an special calling for the Eastern modalities. They just didn't really call to me. I especially didn't feel called to learn about quantum physics, even though I tried and could barely understand any of it. You know, it was just all, the math made no sense to me. But you take sacred geometry and philosophy, science of man and his mind, which Russell did, you put it together, and then it makes a lot more sense. Still with me, guys?
I'm with you. It's the real music of the spheres.
Except for ninjutsu, right?
that was the one Eastern, but that was martial arts. It was more the body in motion for me. And because of ninjutsu, I took gymnastics, so I learned how to do, you know, backflips and sort of a bit of body mastery, you could say. Gymnastics is
That's amazing.
Incredible set of exercises and commanding the body with precision, you know. But yeah, it's,
I
I'd
always
say of
wanted to do a
all
backflip.
the Eastern philosophies, ninjutsu sort of had the only, but I'm referring more to like Eastern religious, kind of like Tibetan Buddhism, or, you know, the meditation things. I found it difficult in the ninjutsu training to work with meditation for myself personally.
Yeah, anyways, I was just going to say that there's a organization based out of Hawaii called Aikido Sengenkai, and I've been reading a lot of their articles about Aikido, and the concepts are really similar. They're talking about the still point and all this, you know. It's almost reading like exactly the same as these concepts. And obviously, they're training people, or well, they're trying to train their students how to actually sense that, you know, make contact with it, and make that the basis of everything they do.
Yeah, I mean, this philosophy is sort of ubiquitous, much like the spiral is ubiquitous throughout nature. There's a certain philosophy around the creation itself and man's relation to the creator of it, which we call religion, for lack of a better term. But typically, very enlightened or illumined human beings are the foundations of a lot of these religions. As you said earlier, Caleb, it's, you know, people try to maintain these records, or, you know, the copy of the copy of the copy becomes, you know, what is it in the beginning of the Lord of the Rings? You know, history became myth, myth became legend, you know, and then it was forgotten. So again, it's, I think, in the creator's charge for us to, which all the world religions really boiled down, have one charge for man to manifest his creator. And that means a lot of things to a lot of people in many different ways, but that's really the charge of man, is to reach that level by climbing the rungs of the ladder, as hard as it is. But we can certainly do that, and paying attention to things that come along from time to time that are divinely inspired are, I don't want to say shortcuts, but they're lessons that if we can take them in and really think about them and integrate them into our own awareness and into our own knowledge base, we can certainly benefit from that. And I can't say anything bad about the Russell philosophy or science, as it's benefited my life in ways I could have never imagined. And had I not had it, this understanding or this understanding, whatever you want to call it, God knows where I'd be today. Probably, probably working to destroy the planet. But I guess it's sort of the beauty of it all is that, self-improvement is a large part to any philosophy. If it's true, if it's going to be something that's beneficial, you want to see yourself progress, not degress. You want to see yourself evolve as opposed to devolve. And we're literally existing in two realities, one of devolution and one of evolution simultaneously. And I like to call it crevolution, which is creation evolving as it's meant to. That's the purpose of it, is to reach higher orders of magnitude. And the more centered, balanced, and the more you operate from that center point of zero within you, which is stillness and silence, not a high vibration, the more you're able to express power and the more you can charge yourself in order to carry out more tasks throughout a day. So the higher charge capacity, it's like having a bigger battery produces more voltage, but it's not necessarily something to strive for, a higher vibration versus, and we talked about that in the first episode we did, but yeah, you can express more of your mind the more mindful you are of your mind as an expressive quality of your being and your spirit.
Well, exactly. I think that's what I was trying to get at before. As you were saying before, when I was talking about guessing, there has to be a way to allow yourself to fully guess until you get it right, and not be afraid to do that. And all of the beliefs that you've held dear all of your life, you have to be willing to let some of them go, some of them systems, and really take a look at the universe around you, understand how it works and how it works through you and is inside of you all at once.
Yeah. And dialogue with it, communicate, hold conference with the creator moment to moment. And don't be afraid of that, no matter what anybody says. I mean, I wouldn't go walking around in a crowded subway talking out loud, to God about anything. It's not what I'm saying, but in other words, it's that self in you that wants to criticize, says, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Why would I want to talk to my own conscience?" Well, why not?
Yeah.
Is my question. Because oftentimes that's the voice in your head that whenever you're about to do something really stupid, that voice would go, "I wouldn't do that." You do it anyways, you end up arrested, or your parents find out what you've been up to, when you're young, and as you're learning the boundaries of society out doing stupid shit, But it's always there, whispering, and we got to learn to listen to it and learn to dialogue with it. That's why people ask me if I even pray. I'm like, no, every thought is a prayer to me. I'm in constant prayer. Why would I not be? Why do I need to just pray at night or when someone dies? Can your thought process itself be a continuous prayer? Absolutely. Why do we place these limitations on us? Why do we think God is an external thing or that it's anthropomorphic at all? It's symbolized by the sun in every tradition, and there is. Jesus is the sun symbolized. I mean, there's that teaching side of it, and then there's the side that he was a real king from Edessa. But what is the allegory of it all? And what can you attain from allegory is the same thing you can attain by reading about the illumination experience a person has. It's all there to help us to better attune to our own divinity within us, and there's no end to what we can produce with it. But as you said, guessing is sort of, there'll come a time when you don't need to guess anymore because you'll know. Your knowing will replace that. Even if it is a divine start, fake it till you make it, whatever you want to say. But Walter would call it experimenting. And he said science doesn't need to experiment, because if man knew what the reaction of TNT would be, he wouldn't have mixed them together and killed several of his own species in an effort to come up with a way to blow up rock, when he could have known ahead of time what the reaction would be. So he said his friend Hudson Maxim, who he painted, blew his hand off because he was trying to come up with the smokeless gunpowder, which he did invent, but it cost him his right hand. And they used to play tennis together. And he said, Hudson, if you'd have just called me, I would have told you not to mix that stuff together without being, far away from it. I could have told you what would make the explosion because I know the chemical elements and how they react if you mix them. He was given knowledge of chemistry that was beyond any chemist of his day. And he even gave much of the knowledge of that chemistry to scientists of his day who, of course, used it for nefarious reasons, which isn't surprising. But so, yeah, we can know. And the more we trust in that process of knowing, and it is a process, and it takes a very long time to unfold it, but learning to listen to your conscience is not an easy thing to do. And it takes a lot of, quietude and listening, which a lot of people don't have time for. But, they get caught up in the bells and the whistles and the loud noises of the world and the endless shows on Netflix and whatever else to take them away from that still silent reflection that is necessary in order to create that relationship with your own internal dialogue. To develop an internal dialogue in the first place, it takes a lot of contemplation and remembering, you could say. But where there's a will, there's a way. And great power comes from it, and great responsibility must come with that great power. Because nobody doing a marathon, to my knowledge, has ever invented anything that made the toil of the human race less. It was always somebody taking a walk in the woods, reflecting quietly in their mind, and then it comes to you. That's when you see it. Some great problem is solved. That's what the idea of the light bulb over the head is to symbolize, is that you're quiet enough, bam, there it comes. Here it is. And there's no problem on earth that we can't consult directly with our own conscience to solve. We just have to learn to trust it. It's something we've forgotten over the eons. McGilchrist says that voice used to be the gods in our head, right? Why do we stop listening?
Should we move on to the next slide?
Sure. Perfect segue. So solid spheres can only occur where the 6 tetrahedrons of cubes unite as one. This drawing shows 4 of the 6 tetrahedron lens systems which create, and I think Russell, actually, this is one of the charts where he did make an actual mistake. Possibly 6 lens systems are basis for countless billions of lens systems contained within them. So if this was to be, for instance, it's showing you more or less a fractal, that every microcosmic lens and every microcosmic lens system focuses its gravity at the same point. So it's saying that it's true for the elements of matter. All matter is a multiplicity of microcosmic lens systems created by wave interchangings, and all focus alike in each element. So again, the more concentrated you get, the more complex. So every true sphere is centered by one focal point of gravity. This is as true of the hollow cathode spheres as it is of solid anode suns. I love the comment there in the middle. Suns are the storehouses of mind idea. Suns are the seeds of all creation. Solar systems are the seeds of suns. The planets of suns, through the planets of suns, all idea of mind is unfolded into image forms and the drama of creation made possible. That is the purpose of suns. It's absolutely beautiful. I've had multiple dreams where I actually plunged myself into the sun and appeared on the earth prior to having ever read any of his work. But if the sun were to suddenly turn off, all idea as we know it would cease to exist. The way he described how the motion of sunlight reaches the earth is that if you think of it this way, that there's a wave field that is the sun. The boundary of that sun, of the wave field, is many thousands. The cube around the sun is many millions of times larger than the sun is. But that plane of the cube, once the light projected from the sun expands it's an expansive projection. But when it hits that wave field, which lies between the Earth and the sun, it reverses toward a compressive. It's not a traveling effect, though. It's optical, meaning it's happening simultaneously. So the sun produces waves of light. Those waves expand and are constant, but they expand at the plane of the cube where they reverse direction and then begin to compress as they emanate. So they're reproduced on the Earth as opposed to traveling to the Earth. And by way of lensing and compression and optics, we can feel the heat of the sun. Because how on earth would heat travel through absolute cold? So this ridiculous idea that even some scientists repeat to this day, that we're just close enough to the sun to be warm, is ridiculous, because the absolute cold of space between us and the sun, however many million miles that is, it's not heat that's traveling through space through absolute cold. The heat is reproduced optically by the lensing and curvature of the atmosphere to reproduce itself on the Earth.
That's incredible.
Much more easy way to think about it, right? Makes more sense. So it's an optical effect, an optical illusion, more or less. But our senses demand that, oh, it must be heat traveling through space. No.
Right.
It's not. We're not just close enough to be warm enough. It's ridiculous. So a lot of this modern day science jargon can be completely discarded. Russell said that some of the theories in science were so unlike nature that the moon might as well be made of green cheese. So your universal mathematics, your ratios, this is from Universal One. He's showing you the cubic ratios, the formula of lock potentials. At all dimensions are pressure dimensions. So in other words, dimensions are not mathematical abstractions or anomalies or imaginary numbers or things of that nature, that all dimensions exist within this one reality, or simultaneously expand and contract in opposite directions of the same ratio. And he lists the 1 through the 4 pressure zones, which are again the locking potentials of the +1, +1, +2, +2, +3, +3, and the 404, which is the crest of every wave in each octave. And you got your direct ratio to the square, and then your inverse ratio.
Should we move on?
Yeah, that's fine. This is the spheres and octaves. Again, it's a generic diagram for the most part, but you have the cube and the sphere and your octaves, your locking potentials, as well as the lensing. And gravity is the great controller. He equated gravity with being God, that God is the stillness that all motion moves around. And you could always locate the creator because the creator is the motionless fulcrum. So whatever is moving is always moving on something that isn't moving. And that's true. That's true. We can verify that. It's not a lofty statement to make the claim that everything that moves on something that isn't moving. Does the center of your body move when you move? And is that center everywhere, as many illuminates have said? If God's power is omnipresent, then we can move on it anywhere in this universe. And that omnipresent power source is really the source behind all motion, which is why all motion can be everywhere in the universe. And if you think of a picture of a galaxy and you invert it and make the dark space white, you will see the omnipresence of the creator. I like to call that kind of an image a God selfie, a selfie of God, if you will. That mind is a field and it's omnipresent. It's everywhere. And that's what powers the motion that we experience with our senses. Go ahead, unless you had comments.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the power of the mind again, and how people are able to transport themselves back in time with books that were written at a certain time, and you can tell in the way that the writer's speaking, You get a flavor of the times, the practices that they talk about of that time, of that era. And the mind will create a picture. And if we're looking for a time machine, we may look no further than the mind, because it is the mind that projects forward for good or ill, whether it's appropriate to do that or not. And I think there are times where the mind should project forward with a good enough idea. But
Sure,
yes,
it's
and go ahead.
wonderfully said. Because you think about it, in our machine mind age, isn't a computer direct example of a human mind? It's got a processor, which is a brain, a thinking brain, but the hard drive is the mind. Yet, where is the information in it? I like to use this analogy. If you go to the library, there's 1 million books in this library, but there's no knowledge in the entire library. Why? Because knowledge isn't in a book. All that's in a book are symbols. They're called an alphabet. They're called letters and numbers. But there's no knowledge in a letter or a number. It's what happens when you read the words in the book, and what happens is you recollect knowledge in the mind through the symbols of the book that are called letters. So there's no knowledge in the book itself. What you're doing is you're recollecting knowledge in the mind, which is what the symbols are decoding when you read it. That throws some people off when I say that. There's no knowledge in a library. What the fuck does that mean, right? But there's really not. It's in the symbols that are recollected, that arrange in a certain way a recollection within the light of your own mind that then you are able to understand. And you interpret it. You interpret symbols into knowledge, which is inside of you. So literally, it's direct mind-to-mind transfer. That's what a book is doing, transferring mental projections and understandings from one mind to another through the use of symbols, which we call letters and
And
words.
that's exactly what we're looking at here. This is how the universe projects its own ideas.
Really a divine science. There's no science like this on Earth. And it's no wonder to me why it's hidden, why it's not promoted, why it's not taught, why it's denied, why they call him a crank and a crackpot, why the Vatican threatened to issue a decree against his Universal One if he republished it.
This one in particular reminds me of William Blake's Four Zoas.
There you go.
Like
that
the
four
egg
is a universal.
splits.
Yep. Of course, you have east, west, north, south, the compass. You have your 4 cross of your zodiac. You have the 4 of, again, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. As your cubic ratios are abounding in this. And then sphere to cube and cube to sphere and back again.
An ovum that's began to split. Okay.
It's a great picture of the bar magnet, an octave bar magnet. And he gives you a hint here that there's 4 pairs of poles. And this is interesting because what we do in the lab verifies a lot of this. But you've got east-west poles as well as north and south poles when it comes to...
Has it got something to do with the sexless pairs?
Well, the pairs are sexed, and when they unite, they create, again, locking potentials that step up in a series of 4. So 4 steps to unity, to form, to matter. And carbon being the center of the 4.5, at the 4th.5 position of the octaves of the 9-octave element chart, carbon is that balancing of the entire wave. And what science does is they say, well, it has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons, interestingly enough. But what you're actually seeing in terms of a carbon element, an atom, for instance, carbon is true cube, where anything beyond carbon is a skewed cube, anything prior to carbon is a skewed cube. So your perfect form is carbon. That's the maturation of matter.
Didn't you say it was the God particle that they've been searching for?
The true God particle is carbon. I made that correlation after studying CERN and particle colliders and the absurdity of what they're doing, basically smashing things together at high velocity and then recording what comes off of those collisions in bubble chambers. And these.
Can you graphene? Because, well, I mean, it's graphene's actually been around for a good number of years, but it's a monoatomic carbon. And
yeah, it's considered the one of the closest to two-dimensional elements that you can get if you slice it small enough. I would not put it in your body because it can do some great damage to the circulatory system, as we've seen, with the shots and all that garbage. But I'm not real familiar with, other than that, it's used in industrial applications pretty extensively. It does have a correct use, I'm sure, but
I read about them in relation to how they would take two layers of two-dimensional graphene layers and cross them at the magic angle, 54.73561 degrees. And fucking hell if I can remember why they were doing that, but yeah, it's interesting.
First I've heard of that. It sounds, I wonder what the purpose is. What were they trying to do with that angle in particular?
Computer chips or some sort of MRI machine or something. I'll find it and send it to you though.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to take a look at that.
I really
Obviously, go ahead.
I've actually seen slides done by Richard Hall where he's looking under a microscope, the vaccine, and there are some very, very strange objects in there. And I wonder, has it got to do with manipulating their, not just their virus regulating system, but other regulating systems as well, maybe affect the orgone in people's bodies. But that's a whole other topic for another day.
Yeah, well, I do know for a fact that graphene does lower the voltage in the body, which the lower the voltage,
Really,
you don't want a high voltage necessarily. You want the right voltage. And unfortunately, these shots and other things that people do can lower that voltage, which allows for a disease state to multiply. So the right human voltage, again, you look at the book, The Body Electric, Robert O. Becker, great book. He goes into the severing limbs from salamanders and things of that nature, which regenerate. They looked for a specific voltage and they found a voltage, it's a DC current. And they did some amazing healing work on people who had lost limbs or had extreme injuries to certain parts of the body. They would apply this voltage and it would create the ideal optimum condition for health and regeneration. Unfortunately, the research got shit canned because they didn't want to create anything that actually heals people. So they lost their funding, but they were showing extremely tremendous results. And Becker was also critical of the RMF and EMF that was in the, increasingly becoming more dense and populated areas, and the effects of EMF on the human body, which they found were absolutely debilitating. So that's another reason they pulled funding from the study of the electric body, more or less, because we are electric beings and we can certainly use electricity to do some really great healing, and the modalities that can come from that understanding of the right kind of application of electricity to healing is incalculable and invaluable in terms of healing. So, but yeah, the God particle, again, I'll just reiterate, carbon has 10 million known chemical bonds. It's the most balanced particle. It's got a closed hole. It's true cube, according to Russell as well. It's also the crystal of carbon, being the diamond, is a symbol for the unity of man and woman in the diamond ring. It's no coincidence in my mind that that's the reason they use that and not some other crystal as a ceremonial union of male and female. So that is the crystallization of the maturation of the wave of all of creation. So God's marriage of male and female is carbon, the carbon molecule.
Amazing.
And is it any wonder why they want to reduce the carbon footprint? Say,
Yeah.
instead of calling it carbon, call it the God particle, call it God. They want to reduce God. That's more or less what they're doing. So again, it's Satanism. The signature is inversion, and anywhere you see the signature, you'll know. So I'd love to see that become a mannerism that people see inversion, they automatically know that what it is and why it is and where it comes from.
But
Be
again,
able to pick these things out and discern them.
Yeah, again, I'm seeing lenses here.
Yep.
Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Lenses.
Exactly.
Transmitting.
And so he's showing you here that a magnet is actually 4 poles, and that it's also lenses of light. So a magnetic field is actually an electrical field. It's not a force called magnetism. There's no such force. Electricity combines from pairs of opposites into a balanced form and then emits heat at the equator to negate that compression back to stillness. The only force required is in the building up of matter. There's no force required to achieve death or rest. So the action half of the wave in reality is the building up or the syntropic path from formlessness to matter, and then from matter back to formlessness, which is the radiative path, which is what we see with our senses.
Can you remember how you said it in The Secret of Light in the playlist that you sent us? The way that you put it was magnetism isn't magnetism in the way that we know it. It's electricity trying to compress itself. I can't remember how you put it. Can you remember?
Yeah, the compression is half of the wave. It's the half we cannot see, like your in-breath. You can't really see anything breathing in, but you can feel its exhalation. You can burn wood and see the heat it gives off by holding your hand over the fire, but it would take you 90 years to watch the acorn become an oak tree that's 50 feet tall and weighs 50 tons. So one is a very long and slow, deliberate building up, and the other can be a quick release. Again, if we made machines that could breathe in, we wouldn't have a running down electrical supply. So we burn coal, we burn oil, we burn gas, we burn propane, we burn diesel, and it runs out. But nature, why does nature never run out? Why is it continuous? Why does it have continuity? Because one half of the entire process of building bodies is unknown to us currently because our senses cannot detect it. So we take motion and set it against itself. In other words, we burn the motion half of the wave. Or I should say the body, solidified body half of the wave. So we're burning bodies basically so we're setting motion on fire instead of building it up into a usable source. So literally the two-way motion universe is what all these diagrams represent. The stages of growth of the 9 pairs of radar mirrors, which divide every wave into rhythmic tones of the light spectrum of gravity. And I believe some of Dr. Russell's work actually helped the Army to develop the system they use as radar. If it wasn't his work, it was Nikola Tesla, but there were some things that in his drawings from the Universal One, I think were able to help develop radar because it works on the same exact theorems here. You see how carbon is at the center, and each pair, helium is the 0 from which the light is projected. Lithium fluoride are the first pair, or the first You could say pole, second pole moving in, oxygen, beryllium, then boron and nitrogen, finally to carbon. So it's 4 pairs of fully toned elements to produce the middle C, or the God particle. Then D and D are extensions of 0 and C. And he goes on to just show you that each one is an extension of the other. So the spectrum of the elements are rhythmic and tonal, meaning that the elements are tonal. So it is a musical universe as much as it is an elemental universe. And again, no science, to my knowledge, combines all of these things into one working system. You either have some people pushing that, oh yeah, it's a tonal universe, but they don't speak to the other aspects of that all being one and the same and explainable through mathematical ratios, which are cubic. The fusion point at the wave amplitude is again carbon, concavity and convexity is
Gonna
beautiful.
move on. Oh, did you want to read this out, or had you already done it?
Sure. It says dimension, objectivity, change, and time are created by a 9-octave series of radar mirrors which record, project, and reflect every action from anywhere in this universe to every other where. So what he's showing us basically is this motion, space to form and back to space, is ubiquitous throughout the entire universe. And every single action of every star, sun, molecule. That's why he would say if a boy threw a ball into the air, the furthest star in the universe would adjust itself to keep perfect balance so that no action that occurs anywhere is not balanced by every action everywhere else, which shows the immense balance that this universe possesses. Is really truly divine to understand it as such. That's why man, when he creates his own suffering and his own sin, um, he suffers greatly for it due to his lack of knowing that one law of balance. Russell was adamant that this one law could basically save man's life if he understood it, if he applied it to his own life and applied it to his systems of thought and teachings as the basis for morality as well as all actions that a man would take in his lifetime. If he understands this one law, he would relieve himself of his suffering, his wars, his famines, his diseases. All of it could be annulled with this understanding of this one cosmic law. And this is just a chart on the storage of energy and mass, nature's method. So integration occurs from the poles to a common center. What cannot integrate is ejected at 90 degrees. So there's a second set of understanding magnetic poles in terms of Russell science. Obviously, you have your 2 poles, north and south, which on a sphere are always signified by the cold. And why are they cold? Why is there ice caps? Because that's the breathing in of space and absolute cold, which is what turns them frozen, and why equators are warm and where the volcano regions are generally located along that equatorial line, because that's where the disintegration or what cannot integrate is ejected at 90 degrees to that in-breath. Just like your 2 nostrils would be integrating the air around your body, and then you disintegrate, or the expansion or the heat death is given off through the mouth. So the 2 nostrils breathe in the cold around you and exhale the heat through one common mouth, which is at your equator, your equatorial region of your own body. So again, you can line your own body up to this universal process. All bodies in motion are generating and degenerating, and then regenerating and degenerating in rhythmic balanced interchangings called cycles of breath. The generating mass seeks higher pressure zones. Degenerating mass seeks lower pressure zones. So there's lower pressure in space. The more space, the less pressure, which is why lighter things seek lower pressure zones. It says regeneration is affected by degenerative impact in inertia, thus reversing sex. Again, this is a drawing that comes from the Universal One. Walter did reformulate a lot of his ideas. He redefined gravity later on. Atomic Suicide is what I'd recommend for your listeners if they want to get the final distillation of the science that was put together in the book Atomic Suicide, which is currently out of print right now, but hoping the university will be reprinting that at some point in the future. I love this photo. Again, it's a chalk drawing. All these are available for viewing in person in Waynesboro, Virginia. You can visit philosophy.org/museum. If you'd like to schedule a time or you plan to visit, you could certainly do that, as well as find out what their events, operating hours are, and all that. But basically, he defines the waves, the wave of creation, as having two functions. One is centripetal, means winding up, and the other is centrifugal, which means unwinding. And cathode waves from the cathode, meaning the discharged or the unwound or the still, from the stillness, waves wind the cosmic clock centripetally, and from the center, they unwind centrifugally. And all windings and unwindings are 90 degrees opposite. So again, let's take the door of your room that you're sitting in. You open and close that door are two opposite motions, and they're basically moving on a fulcrum that does not move, which is at 90 degrees to that motion. But in the cube sphere model, the motions from the cathode plane, which is unwound, as you can see on the bottom left, that four ring drawing on the first half of the cube is an open hole, which is the cathode or the plane of the cube. And so that winds up at 90 degrees to an anode condition and then unwinds in the adjacent cube, moving left to right back to 90 degrees. And you can follow the red arrow A from plane to anode, and from anode back to plane, back to cathode. And then B is the other half of the wave cycle. So cathode is the compression from cathode to anode, and B is the expansion. You have to study these too. I mean, you've got to give yourself time. You can't just snap a photo as you would walking through somewhere. You have to sit with these, and you have to read them. You have to contemplate them. It takes time. It's not something that's going to, unless you've got.
What this looks like to me is the universe pulsating. It
It's a good
looks
way to
like
put
it's, yeah, we're looking at a picture diagram of the universe pulsating, working as we would objectify it as space.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at also at everything else that occupies that space, even if it's deep space, but even if it's not deep space, if it's on a planet, we're looking at matter even as well, even the way matter interacts with one another. And
Correct.
I'm guessing, it's just at different magnitudes depending on octave where you are at in the wave scale.
That's correct. Like what might be true for the motions of Betelgeuse, the red giant in astronomy, versus our local sun, which is obviously in our solar system. These wave motions are the same for either. But one way to also look at this is to realize that it's not a linear progression that you're looking at. This is happening simultaneously.
That's
in
right.
all
This
directions.
is instantaneous. When one part moves, the rest moves instantaneously.
Right. And to the bottom right is a little square. If you could cycle over a little bit, I'll read that. Cathode waves generate heat by multiplying gravity along cube diameters. Anode traverse waves radiate cold by dividing gravity and returning to zero via of diagonals.
Can you make a comment on scalar waves?
Scalar waves, they really don't, for the most part, have a function within this kind of a context. I'm not 100% fluent on how I'd even define a scalar wave. I just know that they're really not compatible with the science in that sense. There's many different words and names for the different waves, square waves, things like that are used in in scientific terminologies, but to my understanding is that scalar waves are a whole different thing in comparison to the Russell science, and I don't know a whole lot about them.
Caleb, if we have a look at the effects of the magic angle of the cube that you were talking about, right? There's this cathode. Could you explain this again for me? This red line here that goes through the magic, that's sort of bent by this magic angle effect of the space cube. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the course of a compressing cathode wave, and it compresses at the corners of the cubes, which is where suns, planets, your body itself would be at a cube corner, for instance. But it also simultaneously, you're centered in a cube as well, which is many millions of times larger than your body.
Caleb brought this up during one of his Unslaved podcasts, and he talked about the magic angle of the cube, and he talked about I think it was the Star of David he was talking about. Maybe it was the octagon. Either way, he was talking about these dates that these terrorist attacks, these events, false flag events that have been noted upon. There's something about this angle that they're supposed to be like in alignment. The timing's supposed to be just right. I wish Caleb was here to talk about it. He's had to dip for just a second. But there's something in this diagram which here with the pyramid as well. And if you have a look at the pyramid in Egypt, there's definitely something being indicated about the pyramid below, the forces acting from it below.
Yeah, the octahedron, that's Russell uses these in several different drawings, but the wave, the direction is a logarithmic. And again, I would point you guys to the work of Hannah von Houck, HANNAH-VANHOUCKE, and look at her two videos that she did at the 2016 homecoming and the 2017 homecoming, which are available at philosophy.org/videos. And you can look at those two where she lays out mathematically that curve with the precise equation.
Did you want to make a I couldn't recommend people enough, and I think I'm probably going to go there as well.
Yeah,
but
she actually
look at
she being an architect and also working with 3D architecture software was able to plot a lot of the functions of the Cuban sphere and their relational movements from one to the other, and just absolutely precision beauty. I can't say enough about her videos and how inspiring they are, because this is what she dealt with, is the cubic wave field model specifically. Right. She actually brought it to life in a lot of her animations, which is absolutely fantastic. We used several of the animations as well that are in the Secret of Light series, which showed this function.
I might even put them up on the screen for people to see as well.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. So again, this science is very new. It's, was only introduced to the world back in 1926. So it was, as Russell put it, they took his universal one and threw it in the wastebasket because he never received a warm welcome with it. He was shunned out of any academic circles for the most part. They preferred their material model and their non-existent quantum model to explain the motions of light. And what he tried to do in giving him this was basically rejected, unfortunately. And no other scientist of the day ever received a threat from the Pope that a decree would be issued against your work if you ever republished it. So, in fact, it was Catholic scientists who earned the promotions, as Lamont's Big Bang would attest to.
I'd say the closest theory that comes to this particular diagram that I've come across is Bill Gates' work. But I think this work is a far more elegant work, shall we say. It's got more finesse in the way that it transmits its ideas.
Well, Sir Oliver Lodge himself said that the great discovery, the great unifying reality of the universe would never come from a scientist. It would come from the supreme inspiration of an artist, a poet, or a saint. And he was one of the primary scientists of his day. He even admitted, and one thing I'll attest to that you can use as an example is you always see these drawings about universe or functions of their materialist paradigm, they always have what says at the bottom right of a drawing, an artist's depiction. So in other words, science can't think of it, even its own theories. It has to go to an artist to depict these ideas of a black hole or a non-existent quantum process. So obviously, why not just ask the artist?
Also, if we take a psychological profile of Walter Russell's board drawings, which essentially, when you look at these pictures in person at the museum, the original ones he drew with the chalk, they're actually kind of large, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And compare that with the psychological profile of some of these general relativity people with their scribbles all over a giant chalkboard with these crazy equations. It's like trying to compare like Jeffrey Dahmer to a normal fucking dude.
Yeah. Or like a child stick figure versus the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo. And it's apples and oranges. It's, I would much more rather trust an artist's rendition of the universe than someone who has to hire an artist to draw it for them, because they lack the imagination to even express this mathematics that they try to say is the reality behind reality, which it's not. It's really an unreality, abstract.
How stupid the mathematics are. The idea that you'll hear general relativists like Michio Kaku say is that as you accelerate in speed, approaching the speed of light, time will warp and slow down, and you'll turn into a grandpa by the time I'm able to pick up a glass of tea and take a sip. It's a simple equation having to do with velocity. Like the equation of velocity says that velocity equals distance, direction, and time.
Mm-hmm.
And because they use the speed of light as a universal constant, which it's not, as you approach the maximum speed, according to them, which it's not, but as you approach the maximum speed, time becomes the other variables in the equation. It changes time in the equation because they're taking a simple little math and taking it to its absolute extreme extent, which to them, they think that means that you can time travel. And it's just fucking, that's how retarded they are.
Mm-hmm. No, it's mental masturbation. There's a term for it, kind of like Charles Howard Hinton imagining a tesseract. He had all these diagrams to help people imagine a non-existent object. That it was rumored many of these people went insane trying to imagine this non-existent object. So if insanity is the result of one's pursuits, maybe you should question that ideology and that path, because it never amounted to anything. And again, this fourth dimensional idea, it caught on because of Johann Zollner's trying to contact beings in a fourth dimension, which he thought was where souls and spirits inhabited. This is sort of a mad scientist. The whole idea of this comes from mad science. And even the crappy art that we see called modern art was the result of the pursuit of this fourth dimension from Henri Poincaré, the French scientist who wrote a book on the subject and inspired Picasso and others to then abandon their traditional art for this revolutionary idea of art, which was to completely throw out the skill and the conceptualizations and replace them with abstract and non-traditional meanderings, which are more or less, again, akin to a mental masturbation. And so what that promotes, the lack of guidance and guidelines and rules, is an anything goes mentality. Men can be women, boys can be girls, fucking anything goes, we can do what we want. It's art. It's all art. I can throw paint on a fucking wall and tape a banana to it and it's worth $88 million. So without rules, without guidelines, without respect for tradition, anybody can be anything. And we think that's advanced, but it's a pure mental masturbation, and the same goes with the mathematics. I could create an equation that tells me exactly when the dog next door is going to take a dump in my yard. And it's mathematically sound, but guess what? The dog did its business about 2 hours before the equation actually said it would. So even though the equation checks out, it's sound, it's mathematically correct, it's not accurate according to reality, So person can make an equation for anything, but it doesn't make it real, you see. And this is why the abandonment of reason and logic for abstract or imaginary things isn't always a sound approach, especially in regards to reality. That's what's so beautiful about a mystic like Russell. As Evelyn Underhill, who wrote the book Mysticism, would say, reality is what a true mystic apprehends, the absolute, They're very acquainted with reality versus being unacquainted. And often in our minds, we think a mystic is unacquainted or somehow drunk or off his rocker, according to the rest of us. No, nothing could be further from the truth. A good mystic, a traditional, accurate mystic, apprehends more of reality than does a layperson who is more fancied by the imaginative or the spiritualist kind of attitude. Let's talk with disincarnate ghosts. Let's contact our dead relatives through seances. This is the kind of imaginative spiritualism that a mystic will destroy with his apprehension of real reality. And they often come back to us with these incredible takeaways that help to explain reality in a way that we never gave the thought in the first place. Because traditional religious practices tend to let the ritual become more important than what the message they're trying to preserve was.
Yeah.
So you end up protecting and preserving a bad copy of a copy of a copy, as you said earlier, Caleb. And so we end up with all kinds of misinformed views of reality, which is why I kind of promote mysticism in a sense. A lot of people don't like it because it's in direct controversy with established religious practices. They don't want you to look outside of their box because you might discover how bad of a replica it is, and how many times it's fucking been copied over and over to the point that it's not even distinguishable from pure imagination. And then it really does become a mental masturbation, which is what a lot of our scientific community is where the term scientism comes from. As Michio Kaku said, higher dimensions are the biggest game in town. Direct quote from the man. But so if we're going to uncover the real, then we have to look with real tools. And a cube and a sphere model are real tools that we can also verify the interchange between the cube and the sphere and what we call nature. What is the hexagon? It is a two-dimensional cube. If you turn it just right, it produces a cube. What are all honeycombs made of? What do bees make to store honey and lay eggs? They create hexagonal combs. What is man but a hexagon? He is a cubic creature with a front, back, a left, a right, a top, and a bottom. In fact, all matter in creation is cubical. Why would we not have a cube as a model of that if that's what we see everywhere? Your computer.
I'm not joking. My bike, the name of my bike is Nature Cube. It's a cube nature bike.
There you go. Synchronicities, bud. That's how you know you're getting close to things, when the synchronicities begin to increase. And the closer you are to the creator, which is a dialogue between you and God within, the more synchronous your life becomes. And if anybody doubts me, just try it. Go and sin no more. Decide to, and what sin is unbalance. It's very simple. Stop doing unbalanced things in your life and watch the synchronicities go off the fucking charts. Start doing balanced things. Talk things over internally. Think inwardly toward your soul and have communion with the creator. which is dead tap center of you. Create this dialogue, use it, use your communicative tools, think inwardly toward the soul, and God will answer you. You can ask God the question at night, and I don't think of him anthropomorphically. I think of him as the vast expanse, this field of mind, which encompasses and embodies all of creation. It's everywhere. It's omnipresent, omniscient. It's the formless prior to taking form, but it centers all form and bounds all form. So it's really just a more expansive view, but it certainly works. You know, I would never promote something that didn't work, that's for sure.
I think we've come to the end of the slides now. We can go back to the one that we briefly looked at before as an ending, or we can just end it here.
Yeah, be happy to, just want to say too, what a great honor it is to join you guys, and I've appreciated Caleb's work for a long time, and
the honor is mine, Matt. The honor is ours.
You guys do great stuff together, and keep it up. And I hope this really helps out a lot of people. But again, I don't have all the answers to, these diagrams are just but a few, 1,000 different ones that are things he's drawn over the years. So somebody might look at something and there's 10 things they notice that I didn't see, or, these things are meant to be studied, and, you have to sit with them again, but there's things that somebody might take away from this instantly, perhaps, that are light years beyond. And what I'm hoping comes out of this study is not only a further recognition of the brilliance of the man and how much he's been overlooked, to a more serious uptake of his work, a more serious approach to his incredible mind and what he left us with. And an application, absolutely, an application of these principles into the kind of machinery that can truly sustain us and free us and help us to get our power back, literally, from the energy barons, warmongers, and central bankers that run this planet and this racket.
Energy barons, right. That's a good term to describe them. Caleb, do you have anything else that you need to ask Matt before we round this up?
No, I think we've covered so much,
Well, yeah, we have, man. It's been a hell of a ride. I've really enjoyed it. It's been mind-opening, to say the least. I've had lots of flashes of flurries of ideas come to me during this, and the synchronicities during this whole period has been really strong. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Matt, for coming on. We really have been honored having you on. And if you could just tell us one more time where to find you and the books from the library that you have, please.
Yeah, sure. I thank you guys again. MattPresti.com, MattPresti.com. Scroll down to the bottom. All my socials are there. All the links to YouTube, Rumble. I tend to only post mostly on Telegram these days, and I'll mirror those over to Twitter and Truth. But for the most part, Telegram's my go-to channel. I'm taking a break right now, but I'll actually be doing a Zoom class in a week or so, sometime around May 5th, I think. So sort of on a spring break from all social media and all that. Much deserved, much needed. And other than that, you can also contact me through mattpresti.com on the contact form, and I'm happy to do more interviews, take part in other people's platforms, just to share the work of one of the men who I consider, he and his wife, to be cosmic geniuses, if you will, especially Walter. And so much good can come from a study of new knowledge that was prior to not available on this planet. So my hope is to see him eventually become a household name and replace Einstein as one of the most genius human beings ever to walk the earth.
Well, one of the things we didn't get to talk about was the Fountain film. But I think the resources that you are preserving for the future is a key to that fountain, the fountain of awe. Unlike the film, your message isn't death is the road to awe. It's stillness is the road to awe. Universal one is the road to awe. And yeah, another thank you. And everybody should have a sense of gratitude for your work. And they should also go on your channel and check out your music and just see that you're an artist as well, not just someone who built a museum from scratch. You know, not just you're not just a fanboy of this guy's work. You're an artist in your own right, and you know, you're far more than just a fanboy. You are a philosopher as well. So please, everybody, go and check this guy's work out. Caleb, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an honor.
All right. See you later.
Cheers.
Catch you next time.